Welcome, everyone. Thanks for joining. We'll get started in just a couple of minutes. Thank you for being early. Welcome, everyone. We'll get started in just about a minute. Thank you for being on time. Thank you, everyone, for joining our webinar today. It looks like we have over 200 people already, so I think we are going to get started. Thanks so much for arriving on time and for joining us. Welcome to the first topical workshop related to advancing 30 by 30 and climate smart lands. Today's workshop focuses on expanding climate action through nature-based solutions and features an advisory panel presentation followed by public input opportunity. My name is Debbie Schechter, and I'll be your facilitator today for this workshop. We're going to start with a few housekeeping items for today. First, we want to let you know that the workshop is being recorded today. You can view it in the future. It'll be posted on the website www.californianature.ca.gov. Also, the workshop is streaming live on the California Natural Resources Agency's YouTube page. We are providing interpretation assistance in Spanish today. So if you need Spanish interpretation, please send a message in the chat or raise your hand using the raise hand function in the Zoom taskbar at the bottom of the screen. And if you're listening on the phone, you can press *9. If time allows, whoops, sorry. In order to access the audio channel for Spanish, you can click on the interpretation button on the globe icon in the Zoom taskbar. And the button will appear after these instructions. Oh, it looks like it's there already. I'm going to allow our interpreter, Victor Hernandez, to repeat these instructions in Spanish, and then you can join the Spanish channel. So go ahead, Victor.
Thank you so much. Can everybody hear me okay? Great. Muy buenas tardes. Le queremos dejar saber que hoy esta reunión será interpretada en el español y ahora para poder acceder al canal de audio, usted tendrá que hacer clic en el botón de interpretación, que es un icono del globo, es decir, un mundo en la barra de tareas de Zoom. Entonces aparecerá un menú y ustedes entonces podrán seleccionar su idioma. Muchas gracias. Thank you.
Thank you, Victor. So participants can join the Spanish interpretation channel by clicking the interpretation button. Thank you. Also, we are providing closed captioning today. If you'd like to use this option, you can click on the More button or the closed caption icon in the Zoom taskbar, and then you can select subtitles if you'd like to view the subtitles, or you can select live transcript to see the full transcript on the side. So participants will be muted until the public input portion of the workshop, and then we'll give you instructions then for how that is going to work. We'll be sharing information in the chat, relevant links and other information. If you need technical assistance, please use the chat function in the Zoom taskbar to contact our technical support folks. And if you're on the phone, you can dial *9 to get technical assistance. Otherwise, again, the chat is only going to be used for technical assistance and sharing information. During the panel presentation, which you'll hear a little bit more about, you can use the Q&A function to send questions that you would like the panel to address. We are only going to have time for a few questions, so we'll ask you to, if you have clarifying questions, only to pose those in the Q&A function. And a clarifying question is basically if there's something that you heard from the panel that you'd like to better understand, you can put that in the Q&A. And again, that is in the Zoom taskbar at the bottom of your screen. We have a lot of people today already. We have over 300 and we're expecting more to join in a little bit. So we want to make this workshop as productive as possible for all of you. So we ask that you please follow these guidelines. The first is to be respectful to each other and to the workshop agenda and keep the objectives in mind. Threatening, profane, or other inappropriate language is not allowed, and disruptive participants will be removed from the workshop. So we ask for your cooperation in making sure that this meeting is productive and effective for all participants. A few introductions. First, Cece Vu is my co-facilitator who will be helping to facilitate the public input portion of the workshop. And joining us from the California Natural Resources Agency are Jennifer Norris, who is the Deputy Secretary for Biodiversity and Habitat, and Amanda Hansen, the Deputy Secretary for Climate Change. Thank you for joining us. We are also joined by a key state partner today in these efforts, who is the California Department of Food and Agriculture Undersecretary, Jenny Lester Moffitt. So thank you, Jenny, also for joining us. I'd like to cover our objectives for today's workshop. The title of today's workshop is Expanding Climate Action Through Nature-Based Solutions. And the objectives are to explore opportunities to address climate change as it relates to advancing 30 by 30 and natural and working lands. We will present the advisory panel findings and recommendations. And we will hear from you about your priorities for addressing climate change. The advisory panel summary document and public input gathered on this topic will be used to develop the Pathways to 30 by 30 document, the Natural and Working Lands Climate Smart Strategy, and the CA Nature GIS tool. So quick review of our agenda. There's a link in the chat that has a detailed agenda that you can follow for today's workshop. We will hear an overview and updates related to Pathways to 30 by 30, Natural and Working Lands Climate Smart Strategy. We'll also talk a little bit about public engagement. We'll then receive a presentation from the advisory panel, followed by the brief Q&A session that I mentioned. We'll take a short break, and then the bulk of the meeting will be comprised of hearing public input from people who registered in advance to speak. Because we want to hear from as many people as possible, we need to limit each speaker's time to 90 seconds. We have many people who signed up to speak. So while this workshop was advertised as going until 6 p.m., we actually expect to extend it by at least an hour to allow all of those who pre-registered to speak to do so. And once that is complete, we'll review some next steps and we'll close. So now I would like to turn it over to Amanda to tell you a little bit about nature-based solutions, climate smart lands, and 30 by 30.
Hi, everyone. Sorry, took me a minute to find the mute button there. Let me just start by thanking everyone for being here. Really excited to get this started. So as Debbie mentioned, I'm Amanda Hansen. I'm the Deputy Secretary for Climate Change at the Natural Resources Agency. And I'm going to provide some background on the Governor's Nature-Based Solutions Executive Order and the Natural and Working Lands Climate Smart Strategy. And then I'm going to hand it over to my colleague Jen, who will talk about Pathways to 30 by 30. So in October of 2020, Governor Newsom advanced Executive Order N8220, committing California to conserving 30% of our lands and coastal waters by 2030 and elevating the role of natural and working lands in the fight against climate change. To deliver on these goals, CNRA, the Resources Agency, is developing 2 strategies in partnership with a variety of state agency partners. First is Pathways to 30 by 30, which will identify strategies to achieve the 30 by 30 goal. And the second is our Natural and Working Lands Climate Smart Strategy to guide long-term climate action on California's lands. Natural and working lands is the term California uses to describe the nature-based climate solutions sector. And these lands cover 90% of the state's 104 million acres. They consist of the landscapes that we know and love, our forests, wetlands, croplands, community green spaces, grasslands, deserts, and more. These lands offer significant opportunity to meet California's climate goals. They can sequester and store carbon, they can reduce climate risk, and they can build climate resilience. But they've long been sort of a missing piece of our state's climate agenda. And so the Natural and Working Lands Climate Smart Strategy is really intended to close this gap. We're very excited to align relevant existing state efforts under one cohesive strategy and identify climate smart land management actions that help us protect vulnerable communities, achieve carbon neutrality, improve public health and safety, and expand economic opportunity.
I'm sorry, Amanda, could you just slow down just a bit so that our interpreters can keep up? I apologize for interrupting you.
No, I'm so sorry. I am speaking really fast today. I'm trying to go quickly because I know it's going to be, I want to get to the good stuff. So we're going to be releasing a draft of the Natural and Working Lands Climate Smart Strategy for public review and comment this summer, and we'll finalize in the fall. I want to thank everyone for the many insights and inputs that have been provided to help inform the development of the strategy thus far. And I look forward to hearing more today related to the questions that we have posed for the panel and for the public. Now over to Jen, and apologies again to the interpreters. Thank you.
Thanks, Amanda. And I'll try to talk slow too. I have a tendency to speed up. Thank you all for being here today. We really appreciate your participation. So just a quick recap of our Pathways to 30 by 30. As one of the world's 36 biodiversity hotspots, California and its high concentration of unique species are experiencing unprecedented threats. The executive order underscores California's commitment to proactively protect species in decline and leverage actions from the environment to achieve biodiversity and reduce the harmful effects of climate change. So as you've heard, our goal is to conserve 30% of our lands and coastal waters by 2030. And we want to do so in a manner that achieves multiple goals. We want to protect biodiversity, combat climate change by using climate smart land management, increase access to nature, and at the same time, safeguard our economic sustainability and food supply. By February 2022, we will deliver our Pathways to 30 by 30 document, which will identify challenges, opportunities, and strategies to achieve conservation of 30 by 30. This document is intended to set us on the path to successful implementation of 30 by 30. We're also developing CA Nature, a geospatial information system being designed in partnership with Esri to be a publicly accessible suite of interactive mapping and visualization tools. CA Nature will bring together biodiversity, climate, and access data into one publicly accessible shared platform. This will be a tool we can all use to identify places across California where we have the opportunity to achieve our biodiversity, climate, and equity goals. We have a lot of work underway that is building on and reliant upon public participation. Your insights are key to the development of the 30 by 30 strategy document and the climate smart land strategy. We can't do this without your input and expertise. So Debbie is going to talk more about opportunities to be engaged in this important work. Thank you all for being here today. We look forward to the panel presentation and from hearing from you. Now to Debbie.
Thanks, Jen. Today's topical workshop builds on several previous public engagement milestones. In January, there was a kickoff webinar that drew over 800 stakeholders from across the state. Formal consultation with California Native American tribes and continued tribal engagement activities are ongoing. We held 9 regional workshops designed to gain perspectives and insights from a broad cross-section of stakeholders across California, where we received over 31,000 comments and had 2,500 attendees across those 9 workshops. Also, a new website has been launched as a one-stop shop for information. There's an interactive public input questionnaire that received over 900 responses. And today kicks off the first of several topical workshops aimed to address key topics and questions, where your input and reflection on the questions being asked of each topical advisory panel and that of the panelists will be used to develop these key strategies. Finally, we're having ongoing engagement with stakeholders and priority communities. We're looking for your input today, and we're looking for specific actionable input and ideas about programs that should be expanded and organizations doing great work to propel us closer to the goal of conserving 30% of California's lands and coastal waters and advancing nature-based solutions, and specifically today in relation to climate action. If you don't get a chance to speak today or you want to provide additional input, you can send an email to californianature@resources.ca.gov. You can send a letter via regular mail, or you can leave a voice message at the 800 number listed on the screen here, which is 1-800-417-0668. And we'll be repeating these options periodically through the meeting using the chat function. So today you're being asked to consider how you would address the questions posed to the panelists, and as well as to provide any other input you'd like to provide on climate action. And the timeframe for this is 1 week after this workshop. And for the upcoming topical workshops, the timing will be the same. We'd like to receive your input 1 week after the workshop. Now I'll hand it back to Jen to give us an overview of tonight's topical advisory panel.
Thanks, Debbie. And I just want to start out at the top and note that we know that 90 seconds isn't very much time to speak on any of these topics, which is why we're providing a lot of opportunity for people to provide information. 90 seconds was chosen because a lot of people want to weigh in, and we're doing our best to accommodate as many people as possible. But please do take advantage of the opportunity to share substantive comments in writing. And we hope at some point we can work toward in-person discussions where we have more time. In the meantime, we hope you'll continue to meet us here in Zoom and make this as good as it possibly can be. So I want to set the table for today, as well as for a series of topical panels to come. So the idea behind the topical advisory panels and the workshops is to address key topics and questions to support the development of the Pathways to 30 by 30 document, the Natural and Working Lands Climate Smart Strategy, and the CA Nature Geographic Information System. Each advisory panel will produce a summary document that gives context to their topic area, offers technical or other insights, and provides key recommendations. We now have 5 workshops planned around 5 topics. So climate action today, which will discuss opportunities to address climate change and how to best deliver on the state's goal to achieve carbon neutrality and build climate resilience. In a week, on the 15th, we're going to have a topical workshop on equity, where we will explore opportunities for the state to advance and promote equity through its conservation and climate smart land strategies. Registration information and the advisory panel's summary document can be found on our website, californianature.ca.gov. So please take a look at that. We're also convening a panel to discuss how best to protect biodiversity through conservation. And finally, we'll have 2 workshops on what we mean when we say conserve. So conserving lands or conserving coastal waters. So how we're defining those terms and what counts. We anticipate releasing information related to the Biodiversity Advisory Panel very soon, including the date for the virtual topical workshop. The Conserve Lands and Coastal Waters workshops will be a little later in the summer. I can hear someone talking, I'm not sure who it is. So something we expect you'll want to know is, how did we select people to serve on our panels? And I can tell you that it really was not easy because we had so many amazing people to choose from. Ultimately, we invited folks known to be credible and independent with experience or expertise on the relevant topic. We also selected them to represent a diversity of perspectives, backgrounds, and experience, including geographies. We wanted people from all over the state. And we sought academic and research experience, as well as practitioners with on-the-ground expertise. But most important, we looked for panelists who could represent a broad array of issues in their field. We weren't looking for advocates for a particular position or point of view. We definitely did not set these up as a battle of stakeholders, but rather a synthesis of the topic and really a conversation starter. We chose our moderators based on their ability to foster a broad, inclusive dialogue that welcomes diverse views. We know we could have chosen so many great people for these panels. We chose these 6, and honestly, I could have picked 60 more. I see many of people that I considered are scheduled to speak today, which is great. There is tremendous expertise across the state on conservation-related issues, which is why we're asking you to provide your perspectives and insights on the topics and key questions being asked of the panel. We think your insights are just as valuable, and we really hope that you will share them with us. Now I'm going to hand it over to Amanda to introduce this topical advisory panel, which is focused on climate. Amanda.
Thanks, Jen. So the advisory panel and you, the public, have been asked to address several questions related to achieving carbon neutrality, building climate resilience, identifying areas of refugia in California, describing strategies that are critical to accelerate climate smart land management across California's landscapes, and best practices for tracking progress of our collective efforts. The specific questions can be found on the project website, which is being linked in the chat. And using those questions along with their expertise, the advisory panel collaborated to distill current knowledge available on conservation and climate smart land management, highlight gaps and needs, and develop recommendations to inform our approaches to accelerate nature-based climate solutions and our approach to achieving 30 by 30. So please join me in welcoming the members of the advisory panel. We have Dr. Laura Kippers, who is the panel moderator. She's an associate professor in the Energy and Resources Group at UC Berkeley and a faculty scientist with the Climate and Ecosystem Sciences Division at Berkeley Lab. Dr. Tapan Patak is a cooperative extension specialist in climate adaptation in agriculture at the Division of Agriculture and Natural Resources at UC Merced. Dr. Patrick Gonzalez is a forest ecologist, principal climate change scientist of the U.S. National Park Service, and an associate adjunct professor at UC Berkeley. Dr. J. Keith Gillis is the chair of the California Board of Forestry and Fire Protection and former dean of UC Berkeley's Rausser College of Natural Resources. Esther Markulis, ASLA, is an associate professor of practice at the USC Master of Landscape Architecture and Urbanism program. Dr. Tessa M. Hill is a professor in the Department of Earth and Planetary Science and Coastal and Marine Sciences Institute at UC Davis and part of the Bodega Marine Laboratory. And now, finally, over to Lara to lead the panel presentation.
Thank you very much, Amanda and Jen. Thanks for engaging our panel in your efforts. We're now going to present an overview of the recommendations from our prior discussion. I wanted to highlight, however, that this presentation really is just a reflection of what's in the written report. So we won't be going into any great detail. This will be a fairly brief overview. At the end, I have a few follow-on questions for the panel, and then as time allows, we'll take questions from those of you who've joined the webinar this afternoon. So please feel free to add your questions to the Q&A, and we'll get to as many of them as we can at the end. So with that, I would like to turn it over to Patrick Gonzalez, who will start us off. Patrick?
Thank you, Laura. Thanks to everybody for your interest. We conserve our parks and other protected areas for many benefits: to conserve nature, to provide water and other essential resources for people, to protect stores of carbon that naturally reduce climate change, and to preserve places important to our society and diverse cultures. Yet human-caused climate change and habitat loss from non-climate forces are damaging nature and its benefits. Our panel aimed to develop science-based recommendations to meet the goal of increasing California protected areas from 22% today, which you should see on the map on the left. Yes, here we go. We developed science-based recommendations to meet the goal of increasing California protected areas from 22% today, that's on the left, the map on the left side, to 30% by 2030, in a way that advances multiple goals together, as you've heard. First, conserve biodiversity. Second, improve the resilience of ecosystems and people to extreme heat, wildfire, tree mortality, sea level rise, and other impacts of climate change. Third, increase stores of carbon in forests and other ecosystems that help to naturally remove from the atmosphere the carbon dioxide that causes climate change. The map on the right shows these stocks across California. All the vegetation in California contains an amount of carbon equivalent to the annual emissions of over 160 million people in the US. Now, that sounds like a lot, 160 million people, but it's not a lot, because in just 1 year, 160 million Americans can burn off all the carbon in the redwoods, the sequoia trees, the California oaks. So the fourth goal, contribute to a green economy, and fifth, make progress on diversity, equity, and inclusion. Next slide, please. Our first recommendation: apply conservation strategies that dynamically respond to climate change. The fundamental strategy is to conserve high carbon and high biodiversity areas together in the same places. Second, prevent habitat loss and fragmentation by more efficient and well-designed land use that enhances connections among ecosystems. Third, protect areas that research shows are more stable under climate change potentially. These are refugia, which provide havens for plant and animal species under climate change. For example, Joshua Tree National Park has used published science to identify climate change refugia for the Joshua tree within the park. And they prioritize those places for invasive species control, fire protection, and other actions. A fourth strategy, increase parks in and around cities. This can improve health, reduce the urban heat island effect, and improve access to nature for all. Fifth, work together with California Native Americans to learn effective conservation practices. Finally, foster community engagement, which is why we've reserved 2 hours today for you to speak. And now, Tessa Hill.
Thank you, Patrick. Next slide, please. I will be speaking today about the next panel recommendation, which is to protect and restore habitats with high carbon density or sequestration potential, and those that support communities and contribute to carbon neutrality more broadly. Next slide, please. Our panel noted that several state habitats are critical for carbon sequestration. This includes coastal redwood forests, coastal vegetated habitats such as wetlands, salt marshes, and seagrass meadows, as well as agricultural and grazing lands. A first step is to closely evaluate state lands and coastal waters for current and historical carbon storage and understand the potential for future carbon storage. Our panel made an important and critical observation, which is that there are risks to these habitats and therefore risks to their carbon storage potential. These risks include land use change, wildfire, and climate change impacts on biodiversity, disease, and pests. Next slide, please. Many of these habitats also have documented co-benefits. For example, they help protect our state water supply, provide essential habitat for biodiversity, green spaces that reduce urban heat, contribute to renewable resources derived from biomass, and provide erosion control and protection from sea level rise. We found that protection and restoration of these multi-benefit landscapes are essential for equitably achieving our state's climate goals and improving the resilience of California communities. I would also like to underscore the panel recommendations that we need to engage local communities in dialogue about sustainable and equitable solutions for climate change. And additionally note that the findings of the report released today on using nature-based solutions to advance equity also make this same important point. I'll now hand off to Keith Gillis.
Thanks. The number of recommendations, if you could advance the slide, please. And it again. The number of recommendations the panel came up with for climate smart land management strategies that would support California's carbon sequestration objectives, as well as provide for a variety of co-benefits, reflects the many opportunities we have to do something meaningful in this regard. We have to shift from reactive fire suppression to proactive vegetation management. There's widespread recognition today that we need more fire on the landscape. There's also growing recognition that vegetation management to utilize the capacity of forests to produce useful products and sustain local economies can support our objective of increased wildfire resistance without necessarily doing damage to our other objectives. Accomplishing this paradigm shift will require that regional nuances in ecology, economic opportunities, and social norms be understood and respected. We know that in some cases, the problem has been too much fire on the landscape, while in parts of the Sierra, the problem has been too little, and what we have experienced wasn't necessarily of the kind we need. The emphasis on restoration, suppression, ignition prevention, prescribed or cultural fire will not be the same across California. Not everyone is accepting this yet, so we need to build trust. We need to build trust that one size fits all approaches will not be imposed across different regions, and that the investment of public funds that is forthcoming in this area will reflect the ecological and social diversity of California. The best way to do that is to listen carefully to the voices of all stakeholders as we decide collectively what we're going to do and what we are not going to do, and trying in particular to facilitate giving voice to those who have felt excluded from land management forums in the past. We need to increase active reforestation efforts. The backlog in this regard is particularly acute on some public forests. Thankfully, the state of California and the U.S. Forest Service's Pacific Southwest region recently signed an agreement for shared stewardship of California's forests and rangelands. It's critical for the state that we follow through on the promise of that agreement to maintain and restore healthy forests and rangelands, reduce risk to people, infrastructure, biodiversity, and the environment. We need to encourage sustainable forest management practices in working lands. Fortunately, the state has been very active in laying the groundwork for this, starting with the state's forest carbon plan in 2018 and the development by the Board of Forestry and Fire Protection of regulatory options such as the Working Forest Management Plan to encourage sustainable forestry on private lands. The governor's office and the legislature understand this need, and they have been taking steps to encourage the development of markets for forest products that can help pay for the vegetation management we so desperately need, and to facilitate vegetation management more generally, and to make sure that the money to accomplish the work really gets on the ground rather than just gets spent on paperwork. The Board of Forestry produced a programmatic environmental impact report to clear a framework under CEQA for compliance with regulations on vegetation management that focuses our planning actions on the things that really matter and aren't business as usual. We've also seen the legislature and the governor's office promote through the Board of Forestry the Joint Institute for Wood Products Innovation to facilitate expanded use of products like cross-laminated timber and improve the market infrastructure for low-value biomass. We need to restore wetlands, salts, marshes, and seagrass ecosystems. One of my other panelists is much more knowledgeable in this field than I am, but anyone in the environmental field knows that our legacy with respect to these critical ecosystems has a few successes like the Coastal Commission, but has many black spots on it. But this is a legacy that we can change. We need to develop effective and dynamic regional land use planning. Pursuing those kinds of multiple issues and goals simultaneously in land use planning is not easy, but holistic thinking is actually something that Californians are good at, and we can set a model for the rest of the nation. We need to increase the development of both urban tree canopy and green spaces. While the overall capacity of urban forests to sequester carbon may be limited relative to that of Sierran or coastal forests or even some other ecosystems, their role can be quite consequential with respect to our overall efforts to decrease energy use. More importantly, I think, increasing investment in urban forests is a matter of social justice that transcends the issue of how many tons of carbon will be sequestered. We need to develop comprehensive vulnerability assessments for agricultural lands. And we have another expert on the panel in that regard. And the research that I've been reading on who bears the brunt of the impacts of drought, extreme heat, environmental shocks to the economy, make it clear that who is impacted by these issues should be at least as important in our policy making as the economic cost of these impacts. Finally, we need to actively engage local communities and coordinate and actively partner with California Native American tribes. It's time that we recognize as a society the value of traditional environmental knowledge and empowered its application. In some cases, this will require that forestry professionals like me think much less about our authority and much more about partnership as our operating framework. And with that, I will pass to you, Esther. So Esther Margulies.
Thank you very much, Keith. And let's go on to the next slide, please. So refugia are land areas where diverse species retreat from climate impacts and stress. They can also be places where species can expand their present habitat. And these land areas are under great pressure from climate impacts of increasing heat, drought, sea level rise, and wildfire. Anthropogenic actions that are causing more abundant carbon emissions from vehicles and urbanization have dramatically reduced refugia globally. At this point in time, only 1 to 2% of terrestrial global vegetation, which may be forests, wetlands, or other landscapes, are actually classified as refugia. And in California, where we have some of the greatest biodiversity hotspots in the hemisphere, our landscapes that serve as refugia are considered highly vulnerable. Next slide, please. In our efforts to build climate resilience for our state, we have recommended that we build and coordinate robust data, policies, and practices related to understanding and managing our refugia, past and present and current. This will require developing data on species migration, dispersal, and connectivity. A good model for this work can be found in the California Essential Habitat Connectivity Project. And our data on marine systems is less robust than terrestrial systems. And with better quality data, we will be able to better account for and predict the dynamic nature of ocean systems. Our decisions related to landscape and marine conservation must account for the risks from current and future disturbances related to climate and anthropogenic impacts. As we proceed, we need to work beyond the currently identified refugia landscapes and think about areas at various scales that represent potential habitat, considering coexistence with agriculture, other working lands, or urbanized areas if we can conserve and manage our lands synergistically. And now I'm going to pass the screen to Tapan Patek.
Yeah, so thanks. I'll be talking more specifically about collective panel recommendations regarding tracking ecosystem carbon and biodiversity to monitor and adapt to impacts of climate change. Next, please. So as we talk about existing efforts related to estimating and tracking carbon content, there are a range of methods that's been utilized and that vary quite substantially across the spatial scale as well as temporal scale under different ecosystems. So moving forward, when we think about this various data streams, we should find way to have more harmonized data stream that both from above ground carbon assessment as well as from the remotely sensed data, and find for those both types of data stream to work seamlessly. One example is to look at, from the panel recommendation, is to look at the Canada National Forest carbon monitoring, accounting, and reporting system and see the feasibility of these kind of system to work in California and to assess and evaluate the system. Another recommendation is to have increased investment in monitoring and data collection that can provide essential information for evaluating carbon stock in California. Next slide. So as we think about impacts of climate change, it's not new that climate change will also affect communities and biodiversity perspective quite disproportionately, depending on the region. Because of climate change, we can find changes in the biodiversity, and it's important to keep track of these changes on a regular basis. So from other regions and places, there are tools and programs in place that are successfully applied, and more specifically, to provide the ability to assess the biodiversity conservation effort against their baseline. And so one example is Singapore Index on Cities Biodiversity, which has been used in Los Angeles Biodiversity Report recently. So effort should be made to look at these kind of tools and programs and see whether these kind of programs could be more applicable to California conditions. Another big issue is related to communication and collaboration between different stakeholders. So when it comes to data and information sharing, there is not a lot of coherence. And so we need to have more established, productive communication and collaboration between all stakeholders involved in tracking and monitoring effort. That includes academic, state, and federal agencies, among other agencies. Last point, which has been mentioned by previous panelists, community engagement. We need to engage community in climate change conversations from early on. We have to make them part of the process and get there, so that in terms of having them engaged can increase their buy-in when it comes to the solutions. I'll hand over to Laura for the next part.
Terrific. Thank you, everyone, for the succinct overview of our report. And what I'd like to do now is just start the discussion with a question for Tessa Hill. So Tessa, there's been a great deal of focus on land-based ecosystems as opportunities for win-win conservation and climate mitigation, particularly in forests. We hear a lot about forests, but California has more than 3,000 miles of coastline. So could you say a little bit more about opportunities for addressing climate mitigation and resilience on our coastline, and why these are important areas to consider as well?
Sure. Thank you, Laura, for the question. The first thing I'd like to do is just acknowledge and appreciate the leadership of the state of California for an existing strong network of marine protected areas along our coast. And within that is also an articulated monitoring system for biodiversity and critical species along our coast. And in fact, some of that monitoring is highlighted as examples in our panel report. But our focus here is actually on coastal habitats that have the potential to store a significant amount of carbon. And we've only recently begun understanding the importance of wetlands, salt marshes, and seagrass meadows in playing that role in carbon storage. So I would mostly just sort of reiterate the panel findings and reaffirm the importance of monitoring in these habitats, understanding their size and extent and changes year to year, protecting these habitats, and developing further knowledge on their potential importance in carbon storage, which appears to be equivalent to some of the land-based habitats that we've been more focused on today.
Thanks, Tessa. Esther, related, could you mention or discuss briefly a couple of key opportunities in and around urban settings that may foster carbon neutrality, climate resilience, or biodiversity values, or some combination of these that you think have particular potential?
Sure. Well, I think some of the panelists have mentioned them in their presentations, but just to focus on a few opportunities, I think we need to be thinking about our urban forestry management plans and planning very differently. We need to be really looking to maximize carbon sequestration and vegetation mass and carbon absorption, and provide and maximizing shading and heat reduction in our urban areas. And these are not what has been driving urban forestry for the past half century. So that's an opportunity. And then I think we also need to be looking at our coastal waters and coastal landscapes. Three of our major metropolitan regions, San Diego, Los Angeles, and the Bay Area, are all the biggest growing, fastest growing cities in our state for a long time. And we need to, I think really essentially, we need to not think of our urban landscapes as separate from our natural and working lands. They all need to pull together to protect, restore, and build biodiversity and resilience.
Thank you for that perspective. Patrick, in thinking about new land acquisitions, this is something that has come up as a potential as we move forward to foster climate resilience, biodiversity, and carbon neutrality. Is there an archetype or a singular highest priority that we should have in your view?
Effective conservation under climate change requires meeting several goals simultaneously, as you've said. First of all are the 3 environmental goals of protecting biodiversity, climate resilience, and carbon neutrality. And then we have the social goals of a green economy and equity. Now, I've conducted a spatial analysis with the National Park Service and other federal agency where we analyze those first 3 goals for the Land and Water Conservation Fund, which is the federal government fund for new acquisitions. And we identified parcels that overlap, where we overlap those 3 factors: biodiversity, climate resilience, and carbon, using published scientific data from colleagues and me and from others. And many of these ended up to be, for example, in the coast redwood forests, where those 3 benefits overlap, and some coast redwoods are not yet protected. Now, adding the social goals will require a portfolio approach for the state so that we can optimize carbon with some acquisitions, optimize equity in different parts of California. So in some overlap when possible, otherwise a portfolio approach.
Thank you, Patrick. Tapan, when evaluating and tracking progress toward goals, you've previously noted the importance of really understanding landowner and land manager needs. So could you say a little bit more about why you have that perspective?
Well, yeah, that's a great question. And then thanks for this question. So my philosophy is that if you want to implement any long-term management actions, irrespective of the sectors, it often requires changes in the behavior of decision makers, right? If you take an example of agriculture, when you think about climate smart agriculture practices, we know that those practices have significant potential for carbon sequestration. But for growers or decision makers to implement those, it sometimes is important to understand growers' perspectives and need that could enable them to make those decisions in a more informed way. Another example, maybe when you think about land managers, they might perceive ecosystem benefits from various management actions differently, and understanding those perspectives might help prioritize long-term goals, maybe customized based on their needs, and develop more focused efforts. So yes, I do think understanding those needs and tailoring with respect to those needs, I think it's crucial.
Thanks. Keith, I think you've alluded to some of these already. But are there specific initiatives underway already that can be built upon or leveraged as we move forward to improve climate resilience and carbon neutrality goals in the state, while also having some of these conservation outcomes? So essentially, are there specific programs in California forests in particular, but more broadly to the extent you're familiar with them, that we should be sort of pushing further as we move forward?
Thanks, Laura. Yeah, I'd highlight 3 that are reflected strongly in the governor's budget just going through the legislature here. One is the fire safe regulations that we are working very hard on in the Board of Forestry and Fire Protection to say, what do we need to do to live safely on the landscape in the same way that we manage any other natural hazard? What are the opportunities for adaptation that we need to engage in order to deal with the natural hazards we face: wildfire, earthquakes, flooding, coastal issues? Another is, I did mention, which was the programmatic environmental impact report for vegetation management that we put out. That ties in with the 3rd thing I want to mention, which is the development of the community wildfire protection plans. These plans, which are, where the priorities for the investments of the public funds that are being directed towards vegetation management, towards putting fire in the landscape, they critically need community members to engage with them. That the agencies need to engage with the communities, but the communities need to engage with the agencies. And that's why I say we need to build some trust there in developing those priorities and spending the money the legislature and the governor are putting into this action in ways which reflect community priorities.
Great. Thank you, Keith. Those are three good things to be looking at. So at this point, what I'd like to do is transition to taking some of the quick questions from the folks who've joined the webinar today. We have a number of questions that have come into the Q&A. And so I don't think we're going to have time to address all of them. We'll take about 15 minutes now, but I will try and pull from some of the questions here as we move forward. So I guess one question that's come up is how can we increase active management and carbon sequestration for non-industrial landowners in the state on the millions of acres in that sort of sector? Keith, maybe this is something you could respond to.
One is to use the regulatory frameworks that we've been developing and enhancing over the years, like the non-industrial timber management plan, because we have to simultaneously work towards both increasing the capacity of these private lands to sequester carbon while meeting the landowner's objectives for holding the land, while we're increasing the security of the carbon that is being sequestered on that land. And so that's, it is not inconsistent to say that we can promote silviculture that both increases carbon, but reduces ladder fuel conditions that make the carbon on the land less likely to meet any kind of a, say, century guideline for sequestration because of the threat of wildfire.
Thanks, Keith. There's a question here related to forest, well, it's sort of related to this broader picture of carbon assessment and monitoring. The question is asking, beyond forest carbon assessment, what other data streams I think should be evaluated or considered? For example, in other ecosystems around the state, shrubland, herbaceous ecosystems, wetland, and so forth. Does somebody want to take that question? Go ahead, Patrick.
Hi, so the map that I showed way back at the beginning, the green map of California, that included all of the wildlands. So it included forest grasslands, wetlands, even the high arid desert. What's missing from that map is agricultural and urban lands, because carbon, thank you, carbon is more controlled in those environments by human action and shows a lot of spatial variation. However, our best estimate showed that it's a relatively smaller fraction of the state. However, the wildlands, we used remote sensing data, Landsat from USGS, paired with on-the-ground measurements, some of them in chaparral and grassland, and also MODIS remote sensing data from NASA. So what's missing is more on-the-ground data in agricultural areas and in cities. And then if you look closely at the legend, this is above ground carbon. This is not quantifying all the carbon in soils, which is very difficult because it cannot be seen by satellites and just requires a lot of field work. So that is a major gap. That is a time series of soil carbon. So our major gaps are cities, agriculture, and below ground carbon.
Great, thank you, Patrick. And that addresses another of the questions that is was in the chat asking about below ground carbon. So terrific that we got 2 for 1 there.
So Laura, we have about 5 more minutes for the Q&A.
Great, thank you. Another question that came up relates to the fact that we've already lost so much biodiversity in our state, or habitat area in our state, particularly in some of our coastal shrublands, for example, and many other habitats as well. So this question asks what the panel thinks about restoring and rewilding areas of the state as a mechanism for expanding our areas, our conservation areas. So do we think we should really be looking to these remaining small patches, or looking to new kinds of opportunities? So maybe Tessa, do you want to take that, thinking about the coastal system perspective?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'm going to answer that and then I'm going to answer with a question, which is that I think the answer is yes, we should be considering all of these approaches. And I also really appreciate the number of comments and questions where people have asked us to consider how we define things. So what does protect mean? What does restore mean? And what is the meaning of conservation at this point? And I think we should be asking all of those questions. So I don't have simple answers, but I think we should be considering all of these approaches, including rewilding.
And Tapan, did you want to weigh in terms of potential opportunities as land for that is no longer viable for productive agriculture, for example, in certain areas might be an opportunity?
So I do think there's an opportunity for those land to kind of, I'm thinking from more agricultural perspective and you know, enhancing the use of cover crops, for example, and utilizing those kind of land where it's less resources, but it still provides those benefits. So I think that's another potential that I can think of. But I do think other panelists are more in line with this recommendations from the other perspective.
Okay, maybe we'll take one more question before we have to wrap up. So here's a question related to what recommendations we may have regarding strategies to consider that are related to migration and corridors for refugia. And I think this is a particularly important question in thinking about how climate change may be shifting the locations of refugia essentially over time, or the size of refugia that are available to various species and communities. So does somebody want to speak to strategies regarding corridors? How might the state move forward in that regard?
Well, Lara, I can pop in with just a few. I also saw a note about looking for some more weight from Southern California. So I have, because I'm down here in LA, I can speak to initiatives that are happening here, maybe not broad state policies, but projects like the land bridge that's crossing the 101, the wildlife corridor, that's currently being funded privately for the most part. That's a major move to connect and create better connectivity for habitat in large areas of wildlands here. And then on the very small scale, we have Councilman Paul Koretz, who is been stewarding a wildlife connectivity planning policy, looking at much smaller scale connectivity, primarily in the Santa Monica Mountains. So I think we need to take these pilot projects and really look at them statewide and see how we can improve our connectivity. Now I'll pass it on to somebody to talk about it at the bigger scale.
Go ahead, Keith.
Could I jump in on that? I apologize to anyone that was having trouble with my audio. Perhaps this is working better. I think taking it to the bigger scale, as Esther just said, is the key. That some of the most important research that I feel I've read in recent decades about this was the work by people like Moritz and Ackerley and Beisinger, where they were looking at the likely impact on the home ranges of both vertebrates and plants as a result of climate change. And so we do have to back up from our focus on small areas to think about the functionality of the network we're creating and making sure that that network is capable of dealing with the dynamics of climate change.
Thank you, Keith. So at this point, I think we will be turning it over or turning it back to Amanda and Jen to hear from all of you who've registered to provide comments and input. And we look forward to further engaging with the state as they move forward with this important initiative. So thank you all to the panel, and thanks to everyone for joining. And
great.
Thanks
so much, Lara and the panelists, for that great presentation, dialogue, and to the public for your insightful questions. We really appreciate everyone's participation in that great discussion. So we are going to take a 5-minute break before we go into the public input session. On the next slide, we have listed the questions that the panelists were asked to address, and also that the public can address. So you can take a look at these during the break. So again, we're going to take a 5-minute break. So please return at 10 after 4, and we'll come back for the public input session. Thanks very much. So welcome back from the break and welcome to the public input session of this workshop. My co-facilitator, Cece Vu, and I will take turns managing the public input session. As a reminder, today's workshop is aimed at exploring how pathways to 30 by 30 and natural and working lands climate smart strategy can best deliver on the state's goals to achieve carbon neutrality and build climate resistance. The input we received from you tonight will be used in the development of these two strategy documents. So I'd like to cover how you can participate in this public input opportunity. If you could go to the next slide, please. So when you registered for this workshop, you were asked whether you wanted to have the opportunity to speak. So if you pre-registered in advance to speak, you will have the opportunity to speak today. And we will stay today until all pre-registered commenters have spoken. If there is not time for you to provide your input today verbally, you can submit comments via email or by voicemail. I do note that there is someone who has raised their hand, and I'm going to explain how to participate because we will not be calling on you just because you raised your hand. We're going to explain the process, and then you'll have the opportunity to raise your hand when it's your turn. So again, each person who signed up will have 90 seconds to speak and provide your input. We'll have a timer on the screen so you can time your remarks. Participants who registered will be called in alphabetical order, and we'll list 5 speakers at a time on the slide. And also regarding the 90 seconds, in order to accommodate Spanish-speaking commenters, we're going to allow double the time, or 3 minutes, to account for interpretation needs. So if you're providing your input in Spanish, please announce that when you're unmuted so that the interpreter can get ready. Sorry, can you go back? I think we're still, well, okay, I'll explain the rest. So when you see or hear your name, we will ask you to then raise your hand at that point. And in the Zoom taskbar, so the Zoom taskbar is at the bottom. We'll ask you to raise your hand when you see your name. If you're on the phone, we'll ask you to please press *9. So we'll announce the name of the next speaker, followed by the one after that. And then you'll have a maximum of 90 seconds to provide your comments. I want to check with our tech support folks because these names here are not in alphabetical order. So we'll wait a minute until we get those first names up. Again, you'll have a maximum of 90 seconds to provide your comments, and you are not able to give your time or take time from other people. Great, thank you. Looks like we have the right slide here. So when you see or hear your name, please start getting ready to speak. And when we read your name, and we'll ask you to unmute yourself. When it's your turn, we'll ask you to unmute yourself, so please do that. If you're on the phone, you'll need to press *6 to unmute yourself. One thing that will help us with this process is that if your name on Zoom is not the same as the name that you registered with, if you could please rename yourself in Zoom by going to your name on the participant list and changing it, and that will make it easier for us to recognize you. This is going to be challenging given the technology, so we ask that you please grant us some grace. There will be some lag time. We want to allow people to get unmuted. There also may be people whose names that we will call who aren't in the meeting, so maybe they registered to speak but they couldn't make it today, but we still need to check and give them a few seconds to respond. So we really appreciate your patience with the technology, and also please forgive us if we mispronounce your name. Again, we're listing speakers in alphabetical order so that you can better anticipate when it's your turn to speak. So our first set of speakers here are Jared Aldern, Amanda Ammon, Anupa Asokan, Rebecca August, and Tim Bailey. So I'm asking for those 5 folks to please use the raise hand button at the base of the screen to let us know that you're here. And then we will ask you to unmute. So you won't be asked to unmute unless it's your turn to speak. So I'll give a few more seconds for those 5 folks to let us know if they're here today. Okay, I see that Tim Bailey is here. So Tim, I've asked you to unmute.
Hello, I'm Tim Bailey. I work for the Watershed Research and Training Center, and I work extensively in forestry projects that are associated with the California Climate Investments Program. And one of the things that I think that there is a real need for is an increase in the quality of forestry work that is being approved by these programs, and it really needs to get into the kind of the regulatory system that, as one of your panelists described, improving the quality of the forests in order to be more resilient while meeting the landowner's objectives is a a critical need for making our forests resilient. So that's all. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Tim. I'm going to give a few more seconds. I don't see any of the other speakers here. I do see that Amanda Ammon is here. I'm going to unmute you, and please let me know if you would like to speak.
Hi there. Good afternoon, Debbie. I do not have a comment at this time. I appreciate it, your guys' time. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Amanda. Okay, I think we're ready to go on to our next set of 5 speakers. Thanks everyone for being patient with our technology challenges. This is much harder than in person.
Hey, Debbie, why don't you pull up the list and just start reading the next 5 names off while we work on the screen?
Okay, great. Give me 1 minute to do that. Okay, here we go. So our next 5 speakers are Kimberly Baker, Lexi Ballinger, Brittany Benessi, Jenny Binstock, and Susie Boyd. I'll read those again since you can't see them on the screen. Kimberly Baker, Lexi Ballinger, Brittany Benessi, Jenny Binstock, and Susie Boyd. Okay, I see Jenny Binstock is here. Jenny, I'm going to ask you to unmute.
Hi, thank you so much. I'll keep it really quick. My name is Jenny Binstock. I work with the Sierra Club. Really appreciate the presentations today and the opportunity to comment. Just a quick point of feedback on the format of the panel and community engagement. It's exciting that there's an opportunity for members of the public to come and hear from expert panelists, but I also want to flag that, you know, as we move forward together, making sure that there are opportunities to make sure that the substance of these translate to communities who are, for example, most impacted by climate change, who may not have a baseline understanding of a lot of the topics being discussed, or regular communication about them can be included in discussions like this. But again, like, this level of expert commentary is very helpful. The other thing I wanted to flag moving forward is just the importance of including desert carbon sequestration in the state's strategy for looking at how public lands can play a role in addressing climate change resilience. They currently make up 27% of the lands in California and sequester about 10% of the state's carbon. So it's really important that they play a key role in the state's strategy. Thank you so much.
Thank you for your comment, Jenny. I don't see any other hands from these 5 folks. I'll give you another few seconds. Oh, here we go. We have Brittany Benessi.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for the opportunity and for the informative panel. Brittany Benessi with Sierra Business Council. I will also keep it brief. Just wanted to note the importance of funding for working with private landowners on acquisition of many of these lands with the greatest opportunity for carbon sequestration. Also wanted to note something within the panel, the recommendation to protect and restore habitats with high carbon density and sequestration potential emphasizes our coastal redwood forests and coastal vegetative habitats and agriculture and grazing lands. Just noted that the Sierra Nevada had been excluded from the list, although it was a significant green part of the ecosystem carbon map. Thank you so much.
Thank you for your comment, Brittany. Okay, just a few seconds to see if any of these other folks are here. Lexi Ballinger, Kimberly Baker, Susie Boyd. All right, let's move on to our next set of 5, which are Victoria Brandon, Peter Brastow, Annie Burke, Mary Buxton, and Sarah Cardona. So I see we have Victoria Brandon. I've unmuted you. Go ahead, Victoria.
Go ahead. Okay, thank you. Thank you for this opportunity. And thank you for putting on this workshop. Very interesting presentations and a lot of people asking the right questions, which is very heartening to see. I have some concerns about the order in which some of this is being undertaken, particularly the whole really crucial question about what do we mean by conserved lands and waters? What are the criteria for that? I see there's a workshop coming up on that, but I think that's a question that has to be answered at the very beginning to provide a baseline for the second really crucial question, which are what are the metrics by which we're going to be able to determine success or not success? And without that, it's an exercise in all sorts of clever and interesting remarks, but not likely to accomplish as much as it could. I'm also concerned with seeing the map there on designations. We need to look beyond legal designations and also look into the conservation management plans for some of our public lands. Public lands which are heavily mined and logged and grazed are not being conserved and not maximizing their carbon potential. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Victoria. Our next speaker is Peter Brastow. Peter, you're unmuted.
Okay, great. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you very much. And thanks for everybody in this great discussion today. So I'm Peter Brastow, and I work in San Francisco for the Department of Environment. I'm the biodiversity coordinator at the department. And one of the things we've been working on recently is our own climate action plan, which is forthcoming. We have a very robust, healthy ecosystems chapter. So we're really excited to present that ultimately in a month or two. And hopefully it can serve as a model for other urban locations. And I really appreciate some of the highlighting of that, of cities and urban areas during the presentations today. Thanks, Esther and Patrick in particular. And just wanted to kind of elevate that topic a little bit by suggesting that the state really dig into urban ecosystems and urban biodiversity and provide some leadership and some guidance in some way, because we get a lot of great kind of policy context at the state and national, international level for our work, but in terms of specifically the importance of urban biodiversity, which was highlighted well today by some of the speakers, I think it would be great for the state to give us some teeth on that. And I think that's all I have to say. I won't take up any more of your time. Thanks again.
Great, thank you, Peter. Our next speaker is Annie Burke. Annie, you should be able to unmute yourself.
Hi there, can you hear me?
Yes.
Great, hi. I'm Annie Burke. I'm with Together Bay Area, a regional coalition of almost 70 tribes, nonprofits, and agencies, all working for climate resilience and equity. And one of our programs is the Conservation Lands Network, regional conservation strategy for biodiversity. That's been co-developed with 100+ scientists and conservation practitioners over the past 15 years. And we want to support, or we do support, the panel's recommendations, and we really thank them for their time and their work and all of the work that you all are doing. We want to underscore the importance of lifting up the leadership of Indigenous leaders, groups, and cultures. We noted that in the presentation and in the report, and just want to underscore the importance of that and how important trust and relationships is in that work. We also want to underscore the importance of stewardship. We hope that stewardship will be part of the definition of conservation, as a previous commenter mentioned. And we hope that the legislature and the governor will back up this really exciting initiative with some significant funding in the state's budget. Agencies like the Coastal Conservancy can really help us all do this work up and down the state. And we thank you for your leadership. We're really excited by this initiative, and we look forward to partnering with you. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Annie. Our next speaker is Mary Buxton. Mary, you should be able to unmute yourself.
Unmute. Hi, I'm Mary Buxton, and I'm with the Sierra Club Loma Prieta chapter. First of all, I want to compliment the Department of Natural Resources on your website, and even before you developed California Nature. I have learned a lot from your speaker series videos as we ran up to 30 by 30. So thank you. I had a question from our conservation director. He's related to question number 3 for this workshop. And his question was, can we establish standards on how much carbon can be sequestered in the land, and how do we make it permanent? So that was the question that I had that I wanted to submit.
Great. Thank you, Mary, for that question, that comment and that question. One more opportunity for Sarah Cardona, if you're here. All right, I'm not seeing her, so let's move to our next set of 5 speakers. And those are Alan Carlton, Sandra Cattell, Stephen Chastain, David Chipping, and Moises Cisneros. So please raise your hand if you all are here and would like to speak. All right, I see Sandra Cattell. You should be able to unmute yourself. Go ahead, Sandra.
Thank you. I would like to just address climate resiliency. I'm in the Angeles chapter of the Sierra Club and would like to address specifics in and around the Los Angeles area. We're looking for restoration and expansion of wetlands that are near urban areas like both Chica and Bayona wetlands. We'd like to see the restoration of some large oil fields like the Inglewood fields that are in the Bayona watershed nearby. We'd like to help ameliorate missing linkages like Montebello Hills, Diamond Bar, Puente Chino Hills, Coyote Hills. Our big barriers are funding, and we would also like you to help us save our deserts from mining and other development. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Sandra. Our next speaker is David Chipping. David, you should be able to unmute yourself.
Yes, thank you very much. I wanted to speak to a specific project that needs to be on the radar of all the important people who've been on this call, and that is the disposition of the Diablo Canyon lands and the enormous coastal landscape, which is basically untouched between Avila Beach and Morro Bay. And it fits just about all the criteria, including marine resources, and it has ag on it, it has many rare species on it. So I just wanted to bring that up as a project for agencies to look at, because it looks like unless the fight between PG&E and its courts and everything else is all worked out, that whole area might be lost to development. So thank you very much, and thank you for the time.
Thank you, David. Our next speaker is Moises Cisneros. Moises, you should be able to unmute yourself.
Yes, thank you so much. My name is Moises Cisneros. I'm with the Sierra Club, and want to send a big thank you to the panelists and the report. Really wonderful wisdom and insights, and I know it's been a lot of work, so we appreciate that very much. My comment is about wanting to bring up the fact that the California deserts store 10% of all of our carbon in the state of California, and disturbing the California desert lands en masse would place carbon back into the air, as well as remove a natural solution to the sequestering of carbon. Specifically, this is very difficult for communities of color who reside in large numbers along the transportation and logistics corridors between the twin ports of Los Angeles and Long Beach and the warehousing distribution centers in the Inland Empire. Disturbing or altering the natural solution that comes with desert carbon sequestration makes matters worse. The air in and around San Bernardino and Riverside counties are already the most polluted in the country, making nearby desert carbon sequestration critically important for our health and environmental justice issues. Thank you very much for considering this point.
Thank you, Moises, for your comment. I'm going to go back to Susie Boyd, whose name was listed on the previous slide, because I see, Susie, that you raised your hand. You should be able to unmute yourself now, Susie.
Thank you so much. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. Thank you for giving me an opportunity to speak at a later time. And also, I thank you for allowing us to submit our public comments. To reiterate Moises' comment about the carbon sequestration, I am a carbon scientist, and the role of carbon sequestration in the desert, I believe, has been seriously neglected. And we do have data that shows that 10% of the state's carbon can be sequestered in the desert, but that's only if the lands are left alone. Unlike the forest, which is my specialty, the forest can grow back and start storing carbon once again. The desert cannot. The soils can get disrupted and take 300 to 5,000 years to get back to where they were, and with most of the storage taking place underground. This is a very critical point. And I want to quickly address the issue about the boundaries. And that is to call attention to the fact that somehow Death Valley National Park has not been included in the desert region. Thank you so much.
Thank you. All right, I believe that we are ready to move on to our next set of speakers. Which begins with Jennifer Clark, Julie Coffey, George Corser, Brandon Dawson, and Jorge de Seco. Sorry if I butchered that. So if you are here and you'd like to speak, please raise your hands. All right, I see Brandon Dawson. Brandon, you should be able to unmute yourself.
Good afternoon, Brandon Dawson, Director of Sierra Club California. I want to first thank you all for having this workshop and having so many of our members being able to comment and provide information as to how you all implement this process. I want to take a moment and urge the agency and the departments to start considering how the principles and findings expressed today and throughout the 30 by 30 process generally can and will be incorporated into current programs, initiatives, and regulatory efforts. There are regulatory efforts at the Board of Forestry, Department of Water Resources, and the Water Board that are currently underway and relate to those states' efforts to meet our climate change goals and also provide for more climate resilience. But they could all benefit from the protective conservation ideas that are coming out through this process, both the panel today and also the earlier workshops that I attended, regional workshops that I attended. So I just urge the departments to start thinking about how they're going to incorporate those as soon as possible, because I think that a lot of those efforts could be more beneficial for the environment and for communities if these 30 by 30 principles are really incorporated into them. So with that, I thank you again and hope you have a wonderful afternoon.
Thank you, Brandon. I'm going to read these names again and give them another few seconds to show up. Jennifer Clark, Julie Coffey, George Corser, and Jorge de Seco. All right, not seeing them, I'm going to move on to our next set of 5. Which begins with Darla de Ruyter, Jan Dierek, Gladwin D'Souza, Deanna Dulin, and Eamon Durkin. So once again, Darla de Ruyter, Jan Dierek, Gladwin D'Souza, Deanna Dulin, and Eamon Durkin. All right, I see that Deanna is here. Deanna, you should be able to unmute yourself and go ahead.
Greetings, everyone, and thank you for including me in this response. My name is Deanna Dulin, and I'm a retired National Park Service Superintendent of 20 years from Devil's Postpile National Monument. And in my 4 decades of work on public lands, I learned of the importance of identifying, protecting, and prioritizing climate refugia to respond to climate change and also to fires and megafires. So climate refugia, both current and future, need to be included as a sensitive resource in wildfire response and prioritized for protection and prescribed fire burn strategies. Climate refugia on all levels are seed banks and migratory corridors for future flora and fauna and for restoring and rewilding future conservation efforts. I do want to respond to the question, is there enough science? And I do want to say I'm been involved in 2 publications, and one will be in the Park Stewardship Forum this fall or winter called Relief from Summer Warming, Devil's Postpile as a Cold Air Pool of Refugia supports a refugium-based conservation strategy. And this is a 10-year study, and it shows the scientific validity of cold air pools to be examined as a refugia and how they can also be effective in summer. Also, another one is Climate Refugia's Climate Adaptation Strategy. That's available on PLOS. The lead author is Tony Limarelli. And thank you again for allowing me to provide support to Climate Refugia with science.
Great, thank you. I'm seeing a message in the chat from Jan Dietrich. I guess I had her name, his or her name spelled wrong. Jan, if you would like to speak, can you please raise your hand and then I can allow you to unmute yourself. So use the, great, thank you, Jan. All right, you should be able to unmute yourself.
Hello, I appreciate the opportunity to speak. I share the concerns about the desert ecosystems that we need to pay attention to those. My main concern, I'm with Rincon Viterbo Insectaries, and we're a commercial insectary focusing on helping farmers with biological control, is with pesticides. That in the Healthy Soils Program, there should be no compensation for farmers who are using toxic pesticides, including chemical fertilizers, herbicides, and broad-spectrum pesticides, as these are harmful to soil microbes and to soil-dwelling arthropods, that these are incompatible with storing up carbon in the soil. That's moving in the wrong direction. And kelp forests, including marine ecosystems of the whole kelp forest and all of the organisms that are involved with that, are really, really important as far as major opportunity to store carbon and in our coastal areas, and the restoration of the kelp forest that after the great blob caused the starfish to get sick, which let loose the sea urchins, totally decimated large areas of north coast of the kelp and the whole community that they support. So support for the ocean going activities of the kelp forest, and then the on land support services for kelp farming would be very appropriate. And then the supply of kelp for human food and animal food, would be useful.
Thank you. Thank you for your comment, Jan. Let's see. I'll give these folks another chance. Darla de Ruyter, Gladwin de Souza, and Eamon Durkin, if you're here. All right, not seeing them, we'll move on to our next 5 speakers, who are Ashley Eagle Gibbs, Lauren Elachi, Jamie Irvin, Andrew Escamilla, Michael Evanson. So if you see your name and you're here and you would like to speak, please raise your hand using the function on the bottom. Okay, I see Jamie Irvin. Jamie, please unmute yourself.
Hi, did that work?
Yes, go ahead.
Great. My name is Jamie Irvin, and I'm calling representing the organization Sierra Forest Legacy. And we appreciate that the recommendations so far include emphasizing conservation of old forests and restoration of these forests through prescribed fire, which are two of our primary goals. Dramatically increasing prescribed fire in the Sierra Nevada is critical because the carbon stored in our fire adapted forest is not stable and not resilient to high severity wildfire in many areas. And the way to fix this is to invest in capacity, which across the West, capacity to implement prescribed burns is the biggest barrier to getting more good fire on the ground. And the state's taken a good step with the recent budget to doing this, and the 30 by 30 process should be more of an incentive to continue these investments. A few ideas are to invest in the prescribed burn associations for private landowners that are forming across the state that allow landowners to do this type of work on their own. Another would be to invest in an interagency prescribed fire training center in California. Also important to be investing in federal lands, which constitute the majority of forests in our state. And really importantly, we support the recommendation to expand cultural fire and feel that tribes should be supported in taking the lead on returning fire to their homelands and should be allowed to do this under their own terms. And then very quickly, 2 points in my 8 seconds. Well, 1 point is that restoration should actually be restoration, and industrial forestry practices like clear cutting should not be counted towards 30 by 30 goals. Thank you.
Thank you, Jamie. Our next speaker is Andrew Escamilla. Go ahead, Andrew, and unmute yourself.
Hi, good evening. Andrew here, pronouncing him, checking in from the San Joaquin Valley on the land of Yokut's land from the beautiful city of Fresno, California. The San Joaquin Valley is one of the least protected regions in the state. Is my clock going? I see on my screen share the clock isn't running. Cool. The San Joaquin Valley is one of the least protected regions in the state, and for us to meaningfully advance biodiversity and our equity goals, the definition of conservation really has to include our long-term and durable protections of our public lands, our important habitats, and also our attempt to safeguard new and expanded green spaces. Some examples of durable protections include halting fracking on public lands, us trying to limit the impact of industries that are extractive and dangerous, and guaranteeing that activities that have been historically prohibited on public lands do not indirectly or directly negatively impact biodiversity, public health, or our state climate goals. Part of this conversation, I think, also needs to include direct investments toward nature deprived frontline communities. And so we're hoping that the CNRA and other agencies that are overseeing 30 by 30 have a funding set aside for our frontline communities who have been historically underinvested and divested from. Lastly, San Joaquin Valley has dozens of cities and over 300 communities that are unincorporated. And so it's important for the natural and working lands policy efforts and drafts to really uplift these regions where these smaller rural communities can both benefit from practices to limit big ag that pollutes our air, that can support climate resilience and biodiversity. Thank you all.
Thank you, Andrew, for your comment. It doesn't look like any of these other folks are here, but I'll just read their names. Ashley Eagle Gibbs, Lauren Elachi, Michael Evanson. No. Okay. We will move on to our next set of 5, which are Abigail Fateman, Belinda Faustinos, Arthur Feinstein, Christy Fisher, and Brenda Gallegos. So if you are here and you'd like to speak, please raise your hand. All right, Abigail Fateman, please unmute yourself and go ahead.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
My name is Abigail Fateman. I am the Executive Director of the East Contra Costa County Habitat Conservancy. My agency implements the East Contra Costa County Habitat Conservation Plan and Natural Community Conservation Plan, which I will refer to as an NCCP throughout my comments. As the state considers mechanism for realizing 30 by 30 goals, I'm here to encourage further development of NCCPs, as well as investment in and leveraging of existing NCCPs. These are locally managed, science-based approaches to conserving lands, restoring habitats, and recovering threatened and endangered species. In focusing on endangered species and their habitats, these programs provide a range of auxiliary ecosystem benefits beyond species protections. These plans provide clean water, flood protection, and carbon sequestration. These locally managed mechanisms exist now. We, myself and colleagues across the state, are doing this work of conserving land now. And CCPs are not only ready to act to implement critically important conservation goals, they are designed to be fully funded, as these lands will be protected in perpetuity, meaning that any land that is conserved is endowed and will be adaptively managed for their resource benefits into the future. The state has spent money, staff, and other personnel resources in developing natural community conservation plans. They should double down on these efforts to develop more plans and support the existing plans so that we can move quickly, so that we do not lose opportunities to conserve critically important land, not only for 30 by 30 climate change goals, but also for endangered species and other benefits. These innovative programs.
Thank you, Abigail. I'm sorry, I'm gonna have to ask you to stop.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Our next speaker is Christy Fisher. Oh, I'm sorry. No, let's do Arthur Feinstein and then Christy Fisher.
Hi. I had not remembered that I checked off I could speak. So thank you very much for giving me the opportunity. And there goes the time. Great. I'm vice chair of the Sierra Club statewide conservation committee, and in the San Francisco Bay area. And certainly in San Francisco Bay area, we have several scientific documents that direct how we should approach climate change and sea level rise resistance, and many studies showing how our wetland habitats sequester unusually large amounts of carbon. And so the two work together. In the example is the San Francisco Bay Adaptation Atlas, also the San Francisco Bay Ecosystem Habitat Goals. All of these talk about the aquatic habitats we have and how they can adjust to sea level rise. And I'm wondering, how are you going to, and urging you to incorporate these studies into your 30 by 30 program and helping implement the recommendations that you find in those documents, which will both help communities resist sea level rise, help sequester carbon, and keep our vital aquatic ecosystems healthy. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Arthur. Christy Fisher is our next speaker. Christy, please unmute yourself.
Thank you very much, Debbie. This is Christy Fisher with the Trust for Public Land. And I'd like to thank you for the emphasis in both the report and the presentations on partnerships, trust building, and avoiding a one-size-fits-all approach as we move forward. Ensuring that tribal groups, rural and underserved communities, and private landowners have the opportunity to fully engage in this process is essential. Specifically in the Central Coast, in which I work, in our increasingly drought and fire-prone regions, below ground carbon storage, especially in grasslands and seasonal wetlands, is likely to be an essential part of the solution. And I wanted to respond to the question regarding strategies that can accelerate implementation of the climate efforts. The first would be to accelerate land acquisition and restoration efforts by increasing staffing and streamlining processes associated with grant program cycles and permits for restoration and prescribed and cultural burns. We also want to note that acquisition alone cannot stem the tide of development in the urban and wildland interface. Land use planning and also programs that help keep private rangelands economically viable are also essential. And finally, I'd just like to say that we need holistic, science-guided wildfire risk mitigation and wildfire response programs that support and sustain forest and watershed health and avoid unnecessarily damaging activities in wildland areas. That's about it. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Christy. I thought that I saw Brenda Gallegos raise her hand. Oh, there she is. Thanks, Brenda. Okay, please unmute yourself and go ahead.
Thank you so much. My name is Brenda Gallegos. I am a Conservation Program Associate with Hispanic Access Foundation. I just want to reiterate to some of my other coalition members that mentioned that 10% of all of California carbon is sequestered in the soils of California deserts. Disturbing California desert lands en masse would place carbon back into the air, as well as remove a natural solution to sequestering carbon. This is especially difficult for communities of color who reside in large numbers along the transportation and logistic corridors between the twin ports of Los Angeles, Long Beach, and the warehousing distribution centers in the Inland Empire. Disturbing or altering this natural solution makes matters worse. The air in and around San Bernardino and Riverside counties are already the most polluted in the country, making nearby desert carbon sequestration critically important for our health and environmental justice issues. We recognize that forests, wetlands, and urban green spaces and other solutions are important to keep in this carbon sequestration discussion. We urge the state to value the California deserts for its nature-based solutions. The desert compromises 27% of the lands in California and sequesters 10% of the state's carbon dioxide. Thank you so much for this opportunity to speak.
Thank you, Brenda. One last chance for Belinda Faustinos. Okay, we'll move on to our next set of 5 speakers, which begins with Mari Galloway, Kate Gaston, Richard Ginger. Oh, the G's are challenging. Daniel Glusenkamp, Manny Gomez. So please raise your hand if you hear your name, hear or see your name. All right, I see Mari Galloway. Mari, please unmute yourself and go ahead.
Hi, thank you for the presentation and taking the time to listen to public input on implementing nature-based solutions. I'm Mari Galloway. I'm the California Project Manager for Wildlands Network and here to urge the state to implement 30 by 30 in a statewide connected network of lands and waters. Scientists are united in the understanding that conservation efforts should strategize to link conservation areas into a connected network, and the science-based approach directly promotes 30 by 30's conveyed goals, including helping our biodiversity by allowing our species to overcome habitat degradation and fragmentation and move over the distances they need to disperse, find new habitat in a changed climate, and have genetic diversity they need to survive, especially for our mountain lions. Additionally, because wildlife is everywhere, our connectivity concerns need to be addressed at every region of the state, which includes urban areas that enhances outdoor access and provides ecosystem representation. So the Liberty Canyon project in Agora Hills was mentioned, which is a great success for our wildlife, but that's one project which has received most of its funding through private donors, and other projects looking to enhance connectivity throughout the state, which is run by partnerships, need the support and capacity from our state. So I was happy to see connectivity included in the report and a reference to the California Central Habitat Connectivity Project. And more resources are available and I hope will be utilized in the planning and implementation of 30 by 30, including California Department of Fish and Wildlife movement barrier priorities. So thank you so much for your time and I look forward to the final report.
Thank you, Mari. Our next speaker is Daniel Glusenkamp. So Daniel, please unmute yourself and go ahead.
Hi, thank you very much. I'm Dan Glusenkamp with the California Institute for Biodiversity. I want to align myself with the other comments, especially those ones thanking you for the really great work here. It's hard to think of anything to add, although obviously this is a big task. In particular, I do want to echo some of what people have said before. In this process, I hope that biodiversity will be really considered quite central, both for prioritizing projects, but then also for establishing metrics and monitoring. When we start wondering, what 30% of what, when we look at phylogenetic information and actual kind of granular biodiversity information, it gives us structure that will let us structure our acquisition plans and everything else. And then obviously gives us things that we can monitor to make sure that we've got good outcome. I also do want to echo what people have said about opportunities to have kind of multi-benefit by investing in decommissioning and cleaning up past mistakes. That ranges from seizing the opportunity to secure the lands around Diablo Canyon to identifying watersheds, fire sheds, where basically the fundamental thermodynamics mean that we're not going to be living in them in perpetuity, places that are going to burn down over and over. And we can proactively help those communities to transition to something different while securing lands for carbon storage and for biodiversity. And then of course, in the urban landscape where we've really underinvested, where there's, Bell Gardens is full of brownfields that could be secured for $1 each and upgraded to provide equitable access to parks and for biodiversity. We currently have legislation before the Senate for school districts to be able to sell their surplus lands. And we should be scooping those up.
Thank you for your comment, Daniel. All right, I'll give the other folks on this list another chance to let us know if you're here and you'd like to speak. So Kate Gaston, Richard Ginger, and Manny Gomez. Are you here? Okay, so we will move on to our next set of 5 speakers, which begins with Amy Granat, Lexi Griddlefeld, Laurel Harkness, Rosalind Helfand, and Ryan Henson. Again, apologies that these names aren't showing up on the screen. There's a bit of a delay. There they are. So Amy Granat, Lexi Griddlefeld, Laurel Harkness, Rosalind Helfand, and Ryan Henson. All right, I see Rosalind is here. Rosalind, please unmute yourself and go ahead.
Hi, this is Rosalind Helfand. I just wanted to bring up that I think there's a really great opportunity here to map out potential policy and budgetary conflicts, barriers, and challenges to being able to implement nature-based solutions for climate. So that can be conflicts that we see between renewable energy infrastructure opportunities and sequestering carbon in the deserts, protecting chaparral and urban forests, and policy directives to increase housing, subsidies for big agriculture, and again, protecting biodiversity and increasing watershed space or undamming rivers. So I think it'd be great to map those out. I also think it'd be great to work early on with developing a communications plan for the public about what's going on, to bring more attention to chaparral, woodlands, and riparian habitats, and to put more focus on the critical role of urban forests and trees in sequestering carbon and protecting habitat. And finally, I think there are opportunities to look at local solutions that will increase health, like bringing agriculture closer to urban spaces while restoring other areas. Thank you.
Thank you, Rosalind. I'll give another chance for other folks on this list to let us know if you're here and you'd like to speak. So Amy Granat, Lexi Griddlefeld, Laurel Harkness, and Ryan Henson. Please let us know if you're here by raising your hand. All right, we're going to move on to our next set of 5 speakers. That begins with Pedro Hernandez, Gary Hughes, Giri Hund, Connor Jandro, and Rick Johnson. Great, I see Pedro Hernandez is here. Pedro, please unmute yourself and go ahead.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. My name is pronounced Pedro Hernandez. I'm calling on behalf of Audubon, California, and specifically wanted to raise the attention of the San Joaquin Valley as one of the most vulnerable in terms of species loss and also in terms of environmental injustices. And I think as far as moving forward, there needs to be very durable protections for the environment and for the ecosystems that so many other things depend on. That being said, I think also in addition to the discussions on urban communities, there must be community-specific solutions for rural communities as well too. I think that's going to be super important from the lens of equity. Also, I think there's going to be a need for sustainable sources of funding for acquisition and for ensuring that these projects actually reach low-income and disadvantaged communities. I think also there's an opportunity to leverage the land transition under the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act to create and enhance the ecosystems as well. And also I think there's going to be a fundamental need for a funding set aside to ensure that projects are reaching disadvantaged communities in more meaningful ways than other set-asides for other state investments have not reached the communities. Furthermore, I think there needs to be a meaningful consideration of environmental justice and equity in every single project where possible. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. Rick Johnson, I believe I saw your hand raised, so I'm allowing you to unmute yourself.
Hello.
Okay, we just lost Rick. I think you just muted yourself again, Rick. Let's see if I can unmute you. Okay, Rick, can you try again? Rick, are you able to unmute yourself?
How's that?
Perfect, go ahead.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm with the Citizens Committee to Complete the Refuge, and our focus is on the protection and restoration of San Francisco Bay habitats. I'd like to talk to about some of the opportunities and barriers. An opportunity is the Don Edwards San Francisco Bay National Wildlife Refuge that already has an authorized expansion area. So there's a need to focus agency and land trust on acquiring those lands. We also have some barriers. We have very good science available in the Bay, as Arthur Feinstein mentioned, with title, subtitle, habitat goals, and values, but there is no group or agency that's responsible for meeting those goals. I would like to see counties or someone held responsible for meeting the Bay habitat goals. Perhaps we could expand the DFW leadership on stewardship and conservation in the Bay. Perhaps we can incorporate the 30 by 30 thinking in the regional planning that goes on in the Bay Area. And right now there's the Plan Bay Area 2050 that does not, but could incorporate that. It seems to me that transportation should be part of this process. Hopefully we can stop building in diked baylands because they can contribute to flood protection and resilience. Lastly, the 2019 Atlas that Arthur Feinstein mentioned is a great resource for identifying specific lands that should be conserved and could be well incorporated in the state's climate smart strategy. Thank you.
Thank you. So I'll give another chance to the folks on this list: Gary Hughes, Giri Hund, and Connor Jandro. Are you here and would you like to speak? Let us know by raising your hand. Okay, we're going to move on to the next 5 speakers on our list, which begins with Shirley Johnson, Marie Jones, Zach Cantor Anaya, Brian Kolodji, and Kimberly Colpin. So if you hear or see your name, please raise your hand. All right, Marie Jones, please unmute yourself and go ahead.
Great, thanks so much for taking the time to hear us. I know it's hard to listen to so many people in a row. My name is Marie Jones and I'm from Mendocino, California, and I'm working with a citizens group that's trying to get Jackson Demonstration State Forest to change their mission a little bit. This is the largest state-owned redwood forest in the state of California. It's 50,000 acres. That was 50,000 acres. And they currently have 5 timber harvest plans that are all on the western edge of the site that are taking down trees that are 100+ years old. We have a timber harvest plan that's about to start any minute that will affect 500 acres of old second growth trees. This is the wrong direction for our state and this time of climate crisis. And I think it's very important that this group look at the mission and the management plan for Jackson State Demonstration Forest. It is an excellent place to demonstrate carbon sequestration. Redwood trees sequester more carbon than any other tree in the world, and they grow for 2,000 years. So that carbon sequestration lasts and lasts and lasts, whereas other vegetative types, that is not the case. We have tree sitters. We're going to have demonstrations. There are literally hundreds of people involved in this, and CAL FIRE is quite simply not listening. So we really hope that you can take this to the governor and help us. We will also do that. And I know I've ran out of time, so I'll shut up now. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Marie. Our next speaker is Kimberly Colpin. Please go ahead, Kimberly, and unmute yourself.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, great. Okay, hi, my name's Kim Colpin. I am on the board of directors as policy chair for the California Council of Land Trusts. And our organization represents more than 70 land trusts here in the state. And land trusts in California help to preserve and conserve over 1 million acres of land here in California. Land trusts play a critical role in land conservation, management, and restoration. And we work in urban, agricultural, and natural landscapes. Therefore, land trusts are an important partner to ensure that the state meets its biodiversity, climate resilience, and access to nature goals. CCLT is here to help with the 30 by 30 initiative. We are willing to do the hard work and the heavy lift to ensure that we reach these goals. And we urge that the participants of this presentation help reach out to us and work with the land trust community so that we can make sure that 30 by 30 is enacted. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kim. I'm going to read the rest of the names on this short list again to give them another chance. So Shirley Johnson, Zach Cantor Anaya, and Brian Kolodji. If you're here, please raise your hand. And also for our phone users, if you're here, press *9. Okay, we're going to move on to the next 5 speakers, which are Joanne Lalaker, Robert Landers, William Lemus, Arthur Levine, and Josette Lewis. So if you are here, please raise your hand. Joanne Lalaker, Robert Landers, William Lemos, Arthur Levine, and Josette Lewis. All right, I see Josette is here. Josette, please go ahead and unmute yourself.
Hi, this is Josette Lewis. I'm with the Almond Board of California. Really appreciate this opportunity to learn about biodiversity conservation and deepen our understanding of how through working with growers and private landowners, we can be part of creating solutions both for biodiversity and sequestering carbon in working land soils. So on the carbon piece, I think we're in pretty good shape in understanding what those practices are. And there's some very strong programs at the state and federal level that we can lean into with growers. On the biodiversity side, one of the things I would really love to learn more about and see this as an opportunity is this particular issue of corridors and refugia. So when I looked at one of the maps that was shown by one of the panelists, there's very little public land in the Central Valley. That's a huge area of private landholders. And the question that I have is, do we take a scatter shot approach, which is sort of what you get when you have voluntary incentive-based habitat creation? Or are there more deliberate strategies to create corridors that we could target with outreach to working lands to have a greater impact? So that's something I would love to hear more about as we go forward.
Great, thank you, Josette. I'll give another opportunity for the rest of the folks on this list to raise their hand if they're here. Joanne Lalaker, Robert Landers, William Lemos, Arthur Levine. Okay, not seeing any of those. We will move on to our next set of 5, which is Robert Leland, Denise Louie, Gilly Lyons, Tyler Madari, and Karen Martin. So if you see or hear your name, please raise your hand. All right, Gilly Lyons, please unmute yourself and go ahead.
Good afternoon. Can you hear me okay? Oh, hello.
Hi, Gilly, you're very faint.
Oh, okay, great.
Oh,
Sorry, I'll
much
try to
better.
speak up. Oh,
That's
great.
much
Okay.
better. Go
Oh,
ahead.
good. Sorry about that. Hi there. My name is Gilly Lyons. I'm with the Pew Charitable Trusts. And thanks so much for the opportunity to provide some brief comments this afternoon. As California advances work to meet its ambitious goals related to biodiversity, climate adaptation, and carbon neutrality, we agree that it will be vitally important to elevate the role of blue carbon habitats as a key ally in these efforts. And we truly appreciate the panel's discussion of these habitats this afternoon and in the summary document. We will not only need to conserve habitats like tidal wetlands, eelgrass meadows, and kelp forests, but also expand and restore them where possible. As discussed, these habitats provide a host of co-benefits that are triple wins that directly mitigate biodiversity loss, greenhouse gas emissions, and climate change impacts such as storm surge and ocean acidification. We recommend that blue carbon habitats be explicitly identified as integral components in the state's nature-based solutions policy guidance documents. We also suggest that the 2022 update of California's climate change scoping plan and natural and working lands inventory incorporate the latest data that can improve carbon accounting for coastal wetlands. This will better inform decisions about prioritizing protection and restoration to maintain and expand the carbon stocks sequestered in these coastal habitats, while pointing the way to priority actions for blue carbon hotspots like the Eel River Estuary, Sassoon Marsh, Humboldt Bay, the Sacramento River Delta, and other estuaries with high carbon storage value. Thanks very much for your time today.
Thank you, Gilly. Our next speaker is Tyler Madari. Tyler, if you could unmute yourself and go ahead.
Hello, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Wonderful. My name is Tyler Madari, and I'm calling on behalf of the Western Riverside County Regional Conservation Authority, or RCA. Habitat conservation plans and national community conservation plans, also known as HCPs and NCCPs, currently exist for the preservation, conservation, and protection of land, species, and habitats, which allow for growing regions like Riverside County to sustainably thrive. These plans are ready, willing, and have the long-term infrastructure to acquire, restore, and uplift lands that can deliver on the state's goal to achieve carbon neutrality and build climate resilience. To that end, the Multiple Species Habitat Conservation Plan in Western Riverside County, one of the largest HCPs in the nation, has 82% of the 500,000 acres preserved. With the state's support and investment, we can help deliver on the 30 by 30 plan beginning today and complete the 500,000 acre preserve. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Karen Martin. Karen, go ahead and unmute yourself, please.
Thank you. I'm Dr. Karen Martin of the Beach Ecology Coalition. I support what Gilly Lyons said about the blue carbon and the importance of coastal ecosystems for sequestering carbon and also for promoting resilience to climate change. These areas are the connection between the marine and the terrestrial ecosystems, and they're really heavily impacted by human activities and by climate change. I'm particularly interested in sandy beaches, and I want to mention that one major human impact has been the loss of native vegetation on our beaches. Beaches are really vital, the only location for key life activities such as feeding, breeding, and resting for many species. For example, they are essential nursery habitats for seals, sea lions, terns, plovers, and California grunting, of course. Healthy beach ecosystems can add climate resilience to urban communities such as San Diego and Los Angeles, as we heard earlier. And these beaches provide open spaces, which are great benefits during the recent past year, and also a refuge during wildfires for people and their pets. I encourage restoration and conservation of beaches be part of the 30 by 30 strategy. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Karen. We'll give another opportunity for Robert Leland or Denise Louie to let us know if you're here. Okay. We will move on to our next 5 speakers. So that is Paul Mason, Rico Mastrodonato, John McCall, Lena McCubby, and Adina Marinlander. So Paul Mason, Rico Mastrodonato, John McCall, Lena McCovey, Adina Marinlander. Okay, Paul Mason, please unmute yourself and go ahead.
Great. Paul Mason with the Pacific Forest Trust. Thanks for the opportunity. I largely agree with the summary report and really appreciate this format of having a little bit of a straw man to inform the conversation and drive the dialogue a little bit. I want to make 3 points responsive to some of the report. One is about priority areas. In terms of an area of focus, really looking at the headwaters of the Sacramento River watershed and the Feather River watershed as an area with disproportionate import to California's water supply, and where we still have these large landscapes where we can do large-scale conservation and restoration, return fire to the landscape, and where we already have some pretty nuanced assessments of climate vulnerabilities and how that's going to impact wildlife and plant migration. So great opportunity there. In terms of action, we really need to move to a more natural forest management approach as quickly as possible, where we're restoring structure into the forest, and that's going to require doing things that take long periods of time. And for that, working forest conservation easements are a really important tool because they allow us to secure some of those commitments to big old trees and maintaining wet meadows, for example, over time in perpetuity. So that really valuable tool there. And the last point I would make is around implementation. The way we've done projects, especially conservation projects in the past, has been deliberately inefficient, where, a land trust might put a project together and then go to 3 or 4 different state funding agencies to cobble together the money for the project. It takes years to do that. If it's actually a good project and the state wants to fund it, let's do that with one transaction so we can move on and do the next transaction and not reward inefficiency. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment, Paul. Our next speaker is Adina Marinlander.
Hello, my name is Adina Marinlander, and I'm a cooperative extension specialist at UC Berkeley. Thanks for the great work that's underway by everyone. Tessa Hill mentioned engaging local communities, and I think that's where UC Climate Stewards can help. This is a new public education and service program developed by UC and offered by local community organizations that prepares participants to engage in climate solutions, community science, and climate communication to advance resilience. The book for the course is being published by UC Press this summer, and in the book, Climate Stewardships, we share stories that show how actions by everyday people are advancing climate resilience across California. On working landscapes for conservation, I hope the Resource Agency can provide a better definition for working lands for conservation and climate resilience and set standards for these lands. To really be considered working lands for conservation, it's essential that biodiversity-friendly practices are used and that they enhance connectivity to promote the movement of organisms. Lastly, in order to meet the goals of 30 by 30, we really need to address habitat conversion of oak woodlands, shrublands, and native grasslands. These habitats need to be protected by the state as working lands for conservation to the same extent that we afford to our working conifer forests. This is an essential step for biodiversity conservation so future generations can enjoy the benefits of California's species-rich landscapes. Thank you.
Thank you, Adina. Our next speaker is Rico Mastrodonato. Rico, go ahead and unmute yourself, please.
Good evening, everybody. Rico Mastrodonato with the Trust for Public Land. I just want to note first, I'm based in Sacramento. I've been here since the beginning of the climate discussions and interventions. I really appreciate this administration's focus on nature-based solutions to climate. It's really a sea change, so thank you for that. I really want to focus on the urban areas, and let me also thank you for the discussion on that and the focus and all the things that you've done. I think the last frontier is public schoolyards. We have to break down the regulatory inefficient and unnecessary green tape around greening our schoolyards, which are often hardscape large campuses that could be accessible to the public, could certainly cool substantially the neighborhood, capture water, recharge groundwater, increase habitat accessibility. It's really checks all the boxes, and it's publicly owned land. This would not require an acquisition, which is usually prohibitive to any kind of intervention in urban California, which is, prohibitively expensive. So I really would like to work with the administration on looking at that seriously. It's a huge opportunity, even in the Central Valley, where we had a speaker talk about all the privately owned land. Well, there's publicly owned land, and it's the public schools. So let's do that everywhere in the state. We've done it in New York City and increased access to 4.1 million people. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Rico. Our next speaker is John McCall. Go ahead and unmute yourself.
Hi there. Thank you so much. My name is John McCall with Sonoma Land Trust. And I wanted to just touch on two of the specific questions that you and the panel provided for us. And we'll be providing written comments on all 5 of the questions. So the first one, which land should we protect? Which land should we conserve? Which lands are most important? This is more of a question and comment, but back in January of 2019, the Resources Agency released the 2030 Natural and Working Lands Climate Change Implementation Plan. I'm sure all the state agency folks and panelists have seen it, but for those who are participating on the call and haven't, it is, as far as I'm concerned, the roadmap forward for so many of the questions we've been talking about today. It sets pathways and acreage goals for different habitat types. It has regional acreage targets and figures. So I really hope that we can come back to that as part of this whole conversation. And then secondly, quickly to jump to the last question, which is how do we measure this? I just want to echo what Annie Burke brought up many calls ago, which is the Conservation Lands Network and regional approaches are what is going to get all this work done. And I know you all are looking at CLN and all the good work it's provided. So let's keep building on that. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you. I'm going to give one more opportunity for Lana McCovey. Okay, we will move on to our next set of speakers, which is Lisa McKelly, Shay Millen, Lauren Miller, Takashi Mizuno, and Tony Lynn Morelli. So if you are here, please raise your hand and we'll unmute you. I did see a previous name that we called, William Lemus. I saw your hand up, but now I see it lowered. So we'll give William a chance and then we'll go to these 5 names on this list. So William, go ahead and unmute yourself.
Hi, folks. William Lemus here in Mendocino, California, just reiterating a previous caller about the importance of Jackson State Demonstration Forest and how public lands there, almost 50,000 acres, could be used to help sequester carbon and address the issues of climate change and modifications to the existing timber harvest plan in the Jackson Demonstration Forest that CAL FIRE manages, so that we can take a look at that demonstration of carbon sequestration applies to the issues of climate change. It seems like a no-brainer to use the public lands that are captured in the forests that are publicly owned by all of the use those state forests to show how we can move forward with a positive kind of accent on public lands being used to demonstrate the direction that many local people here believe we should take in terms of preservation of redwoods, which happen to be second growth redwoods, the premier carbon sequestration agent within our public forests. So thank you very much.
Thank you, William. I just got note that we had someone who lost internet access whose name was also called previously, but is back on. So Rebecca August, if you are here now, if you can raise your hand and we'll take you now. All right, go ahead, Rebecca, and unmute yourself.
Hi, thank you so much for this opportunity. I'm Rebecca August. I'm the Director of Advocacy with Los Padres Forest Watch. I'm calling from the Central Coast, the ancestral territory of the Chumash. And I'd like to elevate this issue of climate resilience and wildfire resilience. Here on the Central Coast, we're lucky to still have some areas of intact native ecosystems. And in conservation, we hope that there will be some prioritization for protection of native ecosystems. And these ecosystems are naturally wildfire resilient and evolved over millennia to be that way. Chaparral ecosystems take time to mature and to develop sufficient seed banks for regeneration, and efforts to masticate or burn them frequently can interfere with this proper regrowth and carbon sequestration, and it can make the lands more flammable with the introduction of invasive weeds. And the forests, we increasingly see healthy restoration and wildfire resilience used interchangeably with commercial logging and biomass harvest. And these are usually done without under categorical exclusions that skip environmental studies and public engagement that's required under NEPA and CEQA that are critical to understanding if these actions will hurt or help the forests. So I'd like to also echo something said by Sierra Legacy, I think, about clear cutting after wildfires. Also, we can often see clear cutting as part of restoration. This is very harmful and greatly reduces carbon sequestration. So we really hope that all these forest management proposals and projects are deeply, deeply immersed in the most current science, not just the science that's convenient and helps with the commercial funding of some of this work. Thank you so much for the panel and for all this information and for the opportunity again to make a comment.
Thanks, Rebecca. Let's see, I'll read these names again on this list. I have not seen any of them raise their hands yet. Lisa McKelly, Shay Millen, Lauren Miller, Takashi Mizuno, and Tony Lynn Morelli. If you are here and you'd like to speak, please raise your hand. Okay, I'm not seeing any of them, so we're going to move on to the next 5 names on the list, which are Renee Owens, Emily Parker, Michelle Passero, Rachel Pattison, and David Pineda. Renee Owens, Emily Parker, Michelle Passero, Rachel Pattison, and David Pineda. If you're here and you'd like to speak, please use the raise hand button to let us know. Okay, not seeing any of them, we'll move on to the next 5 speakers. So we have Lynn Plambeck, Michael Popoff, Charles Pritchard, Nancy Rader, and Ruthie Redmond. And remember also, if some of you are on the phone, please press *9. Otherwise, raise your hand to let us know that you're here and you'd like to speak. So Lynn Plambeck, Michael Popoff, Charles Pritchard, Nancy Rader, and Ruthie Redmond. Okay, moving on again. We have Elizabeth Reed Wainscoat, Cynthia Replogle, Wes Rudiman, Annalise Rivero, and Stephanie Robertson. Please let us know if you're here and you'd like to speak. Elizabeth Reed Wainscoat, Cynthia Replogle, Wes Rudiman, Annalise Rivero, and Stephanie Robertson. I'm just going to scroll through the attendee list to see if I see any of these names, because I'm wondering if people are here or not. But I'm not seeing you. Okay. All right, moving on again. Tom Robinson, Norma Rodriguez, Maricela Rosales, Taylor Roshan, and Wendy Sue Rosen. Tom Robinson, Norma D. Rodriguez, Maricela Rosales, Taylor Roshan, Wendy Sue Rosen. Okay, we're gonna move on. The next 5 speakers are Sharon Sand, Sumit Sandhu, Steve Scheiblower, Jessica Schley, and Melanie Schlotterbeck. Okay. Sharon Sand, you are the next speaker. Please go ahead and unmute yourself.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Sharon Sand, and I work with the Trust for Public Land, and I'm based in Los Angeles on Tongva lands. I want to thank the panelists and Natural Resources Agency for this important work. We live in a great state, and we have a great responsibility to protect it for the people, the flora, and fauna who live here, and also to prevent harmful impacts on climate change as a whole. As we all know, the faster we act, the less costly it will be, both economically for the state budget and in terms of overall impacts. We look forward to seeing short and long-term goals, benchmarks with targets, maps, and dates. Short-term goals can help prevent deaths and other detrimental impacts related to extreme heat, both to people and also plants and animals. This can include parks within walking distance for all, protected urban trails, and street greening for cooler walking and biking, and green schoolyards, taking out masses of asphalt and using cooling surfaces for play yards with trees for shading those play yards, as well as the classrooms. And also protecting and restoring wildlife corridors now through acquisition funding helps prevent species extinction by allowing adaptation, and can also provide much needed public access and connections to nature. Thank you.
Thank you, Sharon. Our next speaker is Sumit Sandhu. Go ahead and unmute yourself, Sumit.
Great. Thank you, Debbie. Thank you for staying on this long. I'm Sumit Sandhu with Climate Data Hub. And thank you for your leadership. We are impressed at the extensive public outreach already underway and the very easy to read panel report. We are curious about what challenges you see with ensuring all key stakeholders are part of this process, such as those underrepresented. We happen to be doing a survey on stakeholder discovery and mapping at climatedatahub.io and would really appreciate all the input. Thank you.
Thank you, Sumit. Our next speaker is Melanie Schlotterbeck. Go ahead and unmute yourself, Melanie.
Hi there. Thank you so much for your time. My name is Melanie Schlotterbeck. I work with Hills for Everyone in Southern California. Just wanted to make a couple of points. Research seems to be pretty limited in Southern California as it relates to vegetation and soil-based carbon sequestration. More information is available for Northern California, so Southern California is already at a deficit. There's also spending inequities in conservation. There's a large bias towards land conservation in the north, and Southern California landscapes must be at the forefront of conservation activities because half the state's population is here. We have a state park system that has the great potential to grow. It's an all hands on deck moment, and we look forward to the time when state parks can begin acquiring land once again, because their participation is essential to the 30 by 30 success. Did also want to point out that Southern California's fire regime is completely unnatural at this point. Vegetation management is not a helpful tool down here in our chaparral and coastal sage scrub habitats. The loss of vegetation means eroding slopes and embers that travel further, faster, and unimpeded. So it is an outdated fire management practice here and is a business as usual approach that needs to be modified. And last but not least, linkages are needed to connect our landscapes together for climate migration and building on the existing preserve system. So we look forward to the use of the California Essential Habitat Connectivity Report and the South Coast Missing Linkages Report as well. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Melanie. I'm going to read the remaining names from this list. Steve Schleibauer and Jessica Schley, are you here? Okay, at this time, I am going to turn it over to my co-facilitator, Cece Vu, who is going to manage the public input period for the rest of the meeting. And she'll go through the next set of slides. So go ahead, Cece.
Thank you, Debbie. Take a much needed break. And at this point, I think we have about 30 registered speakers left. So we may have time to go back around and pick up folks who we've missed in the first round and maybe take a few folks who have not registered. Okay, so we're going to take the next 5 speakers: Marcia Schmitz, Charlie Schneider, Katie Schroeder, Donna Senauer, and Isaac Saratos. If you are here, please raise your hand. And if you're in the phone, or I'm sorry, on the phone, please *9. Marcia Schmidt, Charlie Schneider, Katie Schroeder, Donna Senauer, and Isaac Saratos. Okay. Looks like people are dropping off for dinner, maybe. So we're going to take the next 5 names. Starting with, let's see here. I think Dan Silver, Matthew Simmons, Jen Simmons, Breton Spies, or Spies, excuse me, William Stedden. And I see Matthew Simmons' hand up. Matthew, go ahead and please unmute yourself and speak.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Matt Simmons, and I'm a legal fellow at the Environmental Protection Information Center. Thank you for this opportunity to comment. This comment is in response to question number 1. In order to achieve Governor Newsom's 30 by 30 goal, California must stop commercial logging in the state-run Jackson Demonstration State Forest. Jackson encompasses 50,000 acres of Mendocino County's predominantly coastal redwood forest. Currently, CAL FIRE operates the forest as a commercial timberland under a management plan developed by the Board of Forestry. Numerous timber harvests occur every year under state management. This ongoing demonstration of logging within the forest prevents JDSF from realizing its full potential as a carbon sequestration resource, a biodiversity hotspot, a place for outdoor recreation, and as a place for cultural significance for local indigenous peoples. Despite all of this, very little protects the forest from being logged. JDSF is still designated as a commercial timberland by the Board of Forestry, and CAL FIRE's primary mandate is to conduct timber harvests. These timber harvests produce greenhouse gas emissions and reduce the carbon sequestration potential of our state lands. That's why we're asking you to endorse transforming Jackson from a commercial timberland into a redwood forest reserve. The reserve would not permit commercial timber harvesting. Instead, the reserve would be a forest dedicated to carbon sequestration, biological diversity, low impact recreation, and protection of cultural resources. In order to achieve California's 30 by 30 goal, California will have to conserve lands that are owned by the state but are currently permitting resource extraction. Jackson is a great place to do that.
Thank you, Matthew. Just on time. Okay. Next up, we have William Stedden. William, please go ahead and unmute yourself and speak. William, we can't hear you. I think we're having connectivities with William. William, maybe one of our tech support folks can help you troubleshoot, but I'm going to put you back on mute and then we'll gladly take you once. Okay. All right. I'm going to call some other names on the list to give you a bit more of a chance to raise your hand and to provide comment. Dan Silver, Jen Simmons, Breton Spies. Okay. Looks like we don't have anybody else on this list. We're going to, okay. William says he's finding another microphone. William, we'll welcome you back soon. Next 5 names, please. I think we have Ed Stoven, Edmund Sullivan, Terry Supahan, and Karen Swaim. Do we have Ed Stoven, Edmund Sullivan, Terry Supahan, Karen Swaim, and then we'll add Joan Taylor. Okay, Joan, gonna please unmute and provide your comment.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Urge the state to take a more holistic approach to 30 by 30 by involving the Public Utilities Commission. Why? Because the state's SB 100 report calls for doubling electrical capacity, which equates to more than 1 million acres of large-scale solar and wind in the state. Large-scale renewable energy development is one of the greatest threats. And to take the pressure off the land, we really need to ramp up local generation. However, sadly, right now, PUC policies pose huge barriers to developing PV at load centers and also other local energy resources. For example, local wholesale energy has to pay a transmission access or charge. Why? This is outdated, unfair, and anti-local energy. Also, in the past, California has been a leader in energy efficiency, but now it's falling behind its SB 350 goal of doubling energy efficiency. PUC policy should foster instead of hinder energy efficiency and distributed community energy resources. This would take the pressure off the land. It would mean energy resilience, less dependence on fire-prone transmission, and many, many more local and sustainable jobs. This is a win-win. So I urge CPUC should have to join the campaign and change its regressive policies if we're to meet 30 by 30 goals. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Joan. Good timing. I'm going to put you back on mute, and I'm going to see if anybody else on this list is in the House. Ed Stoven, Edmund Sullivan, Terry Supahan, and Karen Swaim. Okay, we don't have anybody on this list, but I see William Steadden back. So I'm going to ask William to unmute.
Hi, can you hear me?
Very faintly, if you could speak a bit louder.
Okay. Is this anybody? All right.
That's better.
Fortunately, I shouldn't need to take too long. I think Matthew from the previous one, he spoke to most of the points that I was going to. So I just wanted to reiterate that in terms of state public land, the Jackson Demonstration State Forest seems like a really uniquely straightforward solution for hitting all the goals of carbon sequestration, habitat conservation, and equitable recreation. And yeah, I'll see the rest of my time, but just reiterate the great points that Matthew made. Thanks.
Thank you, William. Okay. We're going to move on to our next 5 speakers on the list. Vince Taylor, Ellen Taylor, Craig Thomas, Sylvia Troost, and Lorraine Turk. I see Vince Taylor, so I'm going to go ahead and ask Vince to unmute and provide your comment.
Yes, Vince Taylor here. Can you hear me?
Can hear you very well, Vince. Thank you.
Yes. I'm also going to talk about Jackson State Forest because I think it's really an unrecognized easy win for the state in terms of carbon sequestration, biodiversity, and more access to public recreation near the Bay Area. It's a 50,000 acre redwood forest. It's owned by the people of the state of California. It has been mismanaged by the California Department of Forestry from the very beginning when they bought up millions of board feet of old growth redwood under the pretense of getting cut over lands, and then spent the next 20 years cutting down every old growth redwood tree that they could get their hands on even though their mission was to regrow cut over lands. And then it's gone on from there for the whole time. And we have still a pretty good forest because of citizen action that has prevented them from doing the worst kind of destruction. But now, in this day and age, it doesn't make any sense to continue to treat a publicly owned forest of redwood trees in California as a timber resource. So my hope is that your group of people will make it a priority to transfer the use of this land to a preserve of restoration, carbon sequestration, recreation, biodiversity. Thank you.
Thank you, Vince, for your comment. We're going to go next to Ellen Taylor. Ellen, please unmute yourself and provide your comment.
Hi, and thank you for listening to all of us. I wanted to comment that carbon neutrality has to be a temporary goal. It only maintains the status quo, and things actually will continue to get worse unless we actually move into carbon negativity. But this is a very galvanizing and exciting first step. I want to comment on the importance of the relationship with the tribes. I don't notice any tribal representatives here talking. And so a special outreach to the tribes, which have numerous other problems, has to be made. Also with the general public. I'm the chairperson of the Lost Coast League, which has been fighting for public trust values up here on the North Coast. And our relationship with the timber companies is very adversarial. It's been pointed out that if logging were to stop at this point, it's the shortest way to carbon neutrality, because cutting down the large trees, which is what they tend to do to pay for the timber harvesting, removes the engine that sequesters carbon. In the shortest term, that's the best thing to do. Timber companies cut down trees now at the oldest at 90 years old. Redwoods, of course, are the best sequesterers, but Doug fir, which is what we have here, are almost as good. Tall trees and are shade and protect from fire as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Ellen, for your comment. Lorraine, Lorraine Turk, I'm going to ask you to unmute yourself and provide your comment.
Thank you very much. Excuse me, Lorraine Turk. I live in the desert and I have been involved in a lot of environmental issues related to the use of desert land for huge solar installations that are not necessary. I would refer to Joan Taylor's comments, but also I am very glad that a number of people in today's program have mentioned the overlooking of the carbon sequestration that is available to us in the desert, and all that scraping and building of huge solar arrays is not helping. So, excuse me, that's just all to reiterate what several other speakers have said, including, you must include the quantification of the desert for carbon sequestration. Thank you.
Thank you, Lorraine. Do we have Craig Thomas or Sylvia Troost here? Okay. Hearing none, we will move on to the next list of speakers. We have Kent Wegener, Andy Wellspring, John Wentworth, Thomas Wheeler, and Deborah Williams. If you are still here, please raise your hand. If you're a phone caller, *9, please. Kent Wegener, Andy Wellspring, John Wentworth, Thomas Wheeler, Deborah Williams. Okay. Hearing none, we will move. Oh, here we go. We have John. John, I'm going to ask you to unmute and provide your comment, please.
Good afternoon, everybody, and thanks for the expert panel, the great presentation, and your patience. My name is John Wentworth. I'm with the Mammoth Lakes Trails and Public Access Foundation, and also with something called CalRec Vision. And we're really here to speak and advocate on behalf of the systemic integration of human beings into these natural systems we've been talking about here today. We've heard a lot about nature, we hear a lot about people, but we've also heard this is all one system and should be perceived and managed as such. And many of us have been very inspired by the shared stewardship agreement that was signed by the governor and the chief of the Forest Service. And the CalREC Vision effort is really looking to make the case that the time for statewide cross-jurisdictional collaboration is clear. The catastrophic wildfires and other consequences of climate change have demonstrated the necessity for coordination among agencies, local governments, and organizations to collectively face these destructive impacts and to create work cross-jurisdictionally and to collaborate and to create functional alignments between all agencies to benefit the human beings and the natural resources. More to come on this front, but thank you all for your work today and very much appreciate the opportunity to speak. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Okay, I think we were going to move on to our last 5 speakers, and we can catch anybody we missed in round 2. So we have Cal Winslow, Kylie Wright, Christy Wrigley, David Yao, and Jay Ziegler. Okay, I see Kylie Wright. I'm gonna ask you to unmute, Kylie, and provide your comment.
Hi, my name is Kylie Wright. I'm with Environment California. First off, we want to thank you for your work on the 30 by 30 initiative. We ask that lands that protect the greatest amount of biodiversity be conserved. In addition, in the most recent count, the Western monarch butterfly population has had a 99.9 decline since the 1980s, with less than 2,000 butterflies spotted. Herbicide use is currently killing the native plants such as milkweed that the butterflies need to survive during their 3,000-mile journey from Mexico and across the United States into Canada. It is vital that we protect lands that provide habitat for pollinators. Thank you.
Thank you, Kylie, for your comment. We have Christy Wrigley. Christy, please unmute yourself and provide your comment.
Can you hear me?
Yes, Christy, we can hear you.
Hello?
Yes,
Okay.
Christy, we can hear you. Okay.
Okay, thank you. My name is Christy Wrigley, and I'm a direct downstream landowner for a 20 square mile industrial forest land. And we have been here, my family's been here over 100 years. I've associated with this place for 75. I would like to point out that California Board of Forestry and Department has mismanaged industrial forest land above us. Their THP process is inadequate and biased, especially in the realm of cumulative effects. I've been speaking up for clean water for over 25 years now, and we have gotten exactly nowhere. So I highly recommend that you really look at industrial forest land, especially redwood industrial forest land, because that's what above us. And the age of the trees that are required to adequately store carbon needs to be looked at, because they are harvesting 25 to 35-year-old trees. They are re-entering every 10 to 15 years. And we would like to have more input, significant input into the process. Thank you.
Thank you, Christy. Okay, so I think that covers the last of our speakers who have pre-registered. So we are going to open up the floor now for anybody that we've missed earlier. Oh, sorry, here we go. We have David Yao. David, thank you for your patience, and please unmute and provide your comment.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for having this workshop. Lots of good insights here today. Yes, I'm David Yao with the San Diego Unified Port District, and we will be submitting our comments in writing, but I could not hold back from providing just a few points today. For those of you who have not yet been down here to San Diego to find out for yourselves, we're a conservation agency, so people are always surprised to learn that we have received no tax revenue to do our work of managing and protecting the natural resources in and around San Diego Bay. That's because the public trust requires us to promote and balance navigation, commerce, fisheries, including aquaculture, recreation, and environmental stewardship of the bay's natural resources. That's what we do all year long. We assess, manage, and adapt to current and future ocean and coastal opportunities and challenges. Now enter 30 by 30 movement. This is excellent. And so some key priorities that we'd suggest for your consideration. Quickly, one is recognize the unique role of wetland and eelgrass habitats in blue carbon ecosystems. We've heard a little bit about that today. We want to hear some more. There's carbon sequestration and greenhouse gas emission work that we can do with resources we've got. Include working seascapes more prominently within the framework of conservation and protection. This is part of what we do. We know about this. And this will consider restorative aquaculture as part of a working seascape. Number 3, collaborative stewardship. Again, we're hearing so much of that.
David, I'm sorry to cut you off, but your time is up. We just want to be equitable.
Thank you.
Would you mind submitting the rest of your comment online, please?
It's on the way.
Thank you so much, David. Okay, and we have Vicki Hoover. Please unmute yourself, Vicki, and provide your comment.
Okay, thank you. Yes, I'm Vicki Hoover, a Sierra Club volunteer in San Francisco, but I'm also a frequent visitor to the desert. And I'd like to support the comments from Joan Taylor and others who have emphasized the way that desert soils sequester carbon. This deserves to be repeated again and again because the ability of undisturbed desert soils to sequester carbon is too little recognized. Most people think of forests along those lines, and that's fine. Forests are important, but the undisturbed desert soils have at least as much ability to sequester carbon, and desert plants store carbon. But industrial scale renewable energy facilities, both solar and wind, will scrape the soils and kill the plants and destroy the capacity of the desert soils to sequester carbon. So we need to make sure that renewable energy facilities happen near the cities where the power will be used, and those need to be subsidized, such as rooftop solar needs the state to help subsidize it. Thank you.
Thank you, Vicki. So I just wanted to make sure that we get to folks who registered, who we may have missed in the first round. Just raise your hand if we missed you in the earlier round. But I'm gonna go ahead. Oh, I just saw Drew's hand up, but it just, okay. Drew, I'm gonna call on you to unmute and speak.
Thank you for a very thoughtful panel today, and especially for stating that one management strategy, a one-size management strategy is not going to fit all regions and habitat types in our state. High carbon sequestering shrublands like desert shrublands, sage scrub, and chaparral are being type converted to annual weeds and lose biodiversity and carbon storage potential when they burn too frequently, as many are now. Strategies for bringing back beneficial fire to our forest ecosystems and remove it from our shrublands must be identified and put into practice. And these strategies should be improved over time through truly adaptive design and management. Finally, the IUCN defined nature-based solutions as actions to protect, sustainably manage, and restore ecosystems while simultaneously providing human well-being and biodiversity benefits. For solutions to be truly nature-based, 30 by 30 strategies must prioritize both human well-being and biodiversity. Thank you.
Thank you, Drew, for your comment. Next up, we have Melanie Winter. Melanie, please unmute yourself and provide your comment.
Thank you. Hi, I'm calling from Southern California, urbanized Southern California, Los Angeles specifically. And I want to echo some of the comments made earlier by those calling from urbanized Southern California. But I also wanted to clarify, when we talk about wetlands, mostly what I've heard is seagrass and coastal wetlands and estuaries. And what I'm not hearing is riparian habitats. Often when I speak to people at the state about that not being included, they say, oh, but it is, people understand that. Well, I'm not seeing it. I want to make sure that we are talking about our waterways. Those are our connectors, much better than a freeway overpass, of our biodiverse landscapes, our waterways. So I want to make sure that that is something, especially our coastal waterways. And we've talked a lot about fire, but we're not talking about flood. We know that's going to be a problem. How we manage our waterways, how we manage our floodplains, whether or not we reclaim our floodplain lands using non-structural solutions. These are highly effective in sequestering carbon as well, and can bring great resilience and adaptation and benefits to these urban areas that have been managed so poorly. So I don't want to overlook these heavily urbanized areas that have been transformed, and the opportunity to transform them back to something healthy. Thanks.
Thank you, Melanie, for your comment. So I don't see any hands up, but I understand Marcia Schmidt would like to speak. Marcia, are you still here? I'm going to see if. Marcia, I'm asking you to unmute. Okay, maybe you change your mind. Okay, I see Pamela Hetherington's hand up. So Pamela, please speak.
Hello, thank you for hanging in here all day or all afternoon and staying over. I appreciate it. My name is Pam Hetherington. I'm calling on behalf of the Environmental Center of San Diego. We're a small but mighty nonprofit, and we coordinate the Wildlife and Habitat Conservation Coalition for all the conservation and environmental organizations in San Diego. And I know that one of our top concerns has been the integrity of the reserves and preserve systems, the MSCP, the Multiple Species Conservation Plan properties, and any mitigation properties that have been set aside. I think if the 30 by 30 team looks into these smaller communities, or in our case, a large community, to see what foundations we've laid and then build upon those, I think we would have a win-win that is not one size fits all, but one size that fits each community and area. So thank you for what you're doing. It's so important that future generations have a chance.
Pamela, thank you. And I don't see any other hands up, but I know we have a registered speaker who is still in attendance, and just trying to give you a chance. Shay Milan, are you still here? To raise your hand, just use the raise hand button at the bottom of your Zoom taskbar. And if you're on the phone, *9. Okay, I don't see Shay, but I do see Denise Lenardi. So Denise, I'm going to ask you to unmute and provide your comment.
Hello. Hi.
Hello, we can hear you.
Hi, I just want to mention that I see so much concern on all these communities that want their environment protected. And I am speaking up right now for the Jackson Forest, and particularly in the Casper area that is now being logged or could be potentially being logged soon. And I just find it interesting that we think about more like restoration when it is like it's already there. We have to protect it. And now it's going to be logged, and then we have to then preserve it. So I just think that it's interesting that how everyone is so concerned about their environment. And I don't know really I'm going with this, but I think there's just a great need to preserve so much, and it's all so important. Thank you.
Thank you, Denise. Okay, I see Hannah Tokalski's hand up. Hannah, go ahead and unmute yourself and provide your comment.
Hi, thank you so much. Just a citizen here. I just wanted to return to something the panel had said many hours ago about, and it was sort of a passing comment about the promise of perhaps unused farmland or farmland that is unusable for whatever reason, whether it's been overly extracted or the farmer wants out or the rancher wants out. I think there needs to be some consideration for how we can apply the most evidence-based restoration, rewilding, conservation practices on those fields, in addition to providing some sort of economic kind of attraction for those landowners that might want that out, or that we might think the land would be better served by this as far as climate resilience and carbon drawdown. Thank you.
Thank you, Hannah. Okay, do we have anybody who's interested in providing public comment at this point? I'm going to do a last call, and then we're going to wrap up the meeting and adjourn. Okay. Michelle, I'm sorry, I'm going to butcher your name, Berditskevsky. I'm going to allow you to unmute and provide your comment.
Yes, I'm with the Mount Shasta Bioregional Ecology Center. And for the last 30 years, we've been protecting the large volcanic aquifers of our region, as well as the landscape that support those aquifers, Mount Shasta and Medicine Lake Highlands. And we're always shocked by the lack of acknowledgement of these aquifers in the state's water programs, particularly in Bulletin 118. And we would like to see these aquifers and the landscapes that support them designated as a volcanic source water preserve. These lands are still very much intact, very pristine, and they would go a long way toward the 30-30 requirements. And they would require state-federal collaboration since they are federal lands. So we want to encourage that, and we'd like to hear more about these aquifers, protecting the waters, the Sacramento, the upper Sacramento, and the lands that support them. Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle. We have Tom Conlon. Tom, please go ahead and unmute. And
thank you. Tom Conlon here in Sonoma Valley, active with Sierra Club at the Redwood chapter, but speaking as an individual myself today. I come from an extensive background in the energy efficiency industry and in developing California's measurement and evaluation protocols as well as program implementation and evaluation. And it strikes me that as I hadn't intended to comment, but you're beginning this process of setting up the whole framework to invest in these market interventions and these potentially incentives to various different activities. And you'll have to be making trade-offs between projects based on whether they're deserving of special treatment. And I'm concerned about issues of additionality, issues of persistence. And, I think we're really going to need for the governor to step up. And, you've heard numerous people speak to various projects, Jackson Forest or coastal improvements. These may be valid, but until you have a framework to trade off, to justify your investments in one or the other project, we're all going to be just talking around one another. So I hope you'll take those comments into consideration. Thank you again.
Thank you, Tom. Okay, I think we're going to wrap up. We have a speaker who has already spoken, and I just want to be fair and equitable to everyone else who's attended and honored their 90 minutes. So your comment, if you can provide that in writing, we would really appreciate that. Given that we don't have any other hands up, I'm going to wrap things up. Thank you all for your participation today. We will be providing a meeting summary that includes all your input today. Very rich input that you provided, and it will be posted on the project website you see here and shared with participants. So www.californianature.ca.gov. You will also receive a post-meeting survey for you to provide feedback on how we can improve on the workshop, what you thought about it. And again, there are these other ways that you can provide comment, as I mentioned earlier, by email, mail, and voicemail. Thanks again for your participation. I wanted to give Jen and Amanda the last opportunity to do some closing remarks, and then we will adjourn. Jen, Amanda.
I'll just say thank you to the facilitation team and to the translators who did a great job of keeping us moving. I also want to say thank you to all the participants who participated. It was a really useful set of comments, very substantive and valuable. So thank you. I'll leave it to Amanda to thank the panel because she invited them. But thanks, panel.
Thanks, Jen. Yes, a huge thanks to our panel who really worked on a pretty tight time frame to develop their really thoughtful recommendations. So incredibly grateful to all of you for your time, which we know is precious, and your experience, sharing your experience and your expertise with us. And I'm going to say the exact same thing to members of the public who took time out tonight to provide us with your thoughts to these questions. These are really sticky issues, and that's why they're the questions that we asked. And so really appreciate the thoughtful input, and just want to say, I mean, from my perspective, as I think about building out this, a draft of the Natural and Working Lands Climate Smart Strategy, which will be coming out later this summer, I think that there's a lot of alignment with what I've heard today and where we are headed on a lot of these climate issues. So thank you all so much. We're really excited to move it forward.
And thank you all. Meeting is adjourned.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.